Husband's long-planned retaliation unfolds after discovering wife's years of infidelity. Jason Chandler sat on the couch, fixated on his phone until Karen, his wife of nearly 10 years, called with unsettling news. Earlier, a private investigator had revealed Karen's deceit. She and her lover were en route to Honolulu, contrary to her claims. Jason pondered his naivety, having devoted a decade to their relationship, now shattered by her lies. Taking a gulp of coffee, he reclined, reflecting on their history. They met in college 13 years prior, both pursuing business degrees. Their romance blossomed, leading to marriage post-graduation. Jason joined his father's tire business, mastering various roles and ascending to head the accounting department. He aspired to inherit the company from his father and succeed Mike Allen, the retiring CFO. After marrying, Karen pursued a career as a realtor, excelling even during tough market times. They lived comfortably, with a nice house and new cars, seemingly secure in their marriage. Though they were childless, he saw it as a blessing. Initially, Karen mentioned fertility issues, opting for tubal ligation. Despite suggesting adoption, she declined. Recently, her increased social outings sparked his suspicion, especially her late returns home. Despite expressing his concerns, she dismissed them, attributing her absences to work stress. "What were you doing out so late?" he inquired as she returned home one night, looking disheveled with a scent of cigarettes clinging to her clothes. "Just hanging out, having a few drinks," she replied defensively. "It's my business, Jace. I can take care of myself." Jason was taken aback by her tone, a departure from her usual demeanor. Seeing his reaction, she softened. "I'm sorry, Jace," she apologized. "It's just work stress getting to me." "You've handled market pressures before without this," he pointed out. "What's changed?" "It's tougher than ever out there," she explained. "Competition's fierce and the pressure's relentless." "I get it, but don't take it out on me," he reassured her. "I'm on your side." She hugged him, expressing regret. "You're right, dear, I'm sorry." "Agreed, but please freshen up," he requested. "You reek of smoke." "Apologies, it was smoky at the club," she conceded, heading for a shower. He was already asleep when she joined him in bed. Over time, their closeness dwindled from several times a week to barely once a fortnight. Her interest in his life waned, and he noticed her blatant lies, like when she claimed to be at the office when she wasn't. He refrained from confronting her, sensing her potential explosive reaction. He pondered how many more lies she might have told. Lying awake beside her, he gazed at her, his worry evident. "What's on your mind, Jace?" she inquired. "I'm worried," he admitted. "About what?" she probed. "Us," he confessed. "It feels like we're growing apart. Do you still love me?" "Of course, sweetheart," she reassured, embracing him. "You know that, right?" "I honestly don't know," he confessed. "It's been a while since you said it, and our closeness has dwindled. You're out more than you're home." "I'm sorry," she apologized. "Work's been overwhelming. I do love you. Please trust me." "Can you show me more?" he requested. "Of course, baby," she affirmed, kissing him. They made love that night, soothing Jason's worries temporarily, but concerns lingered. A month passed, and the cycle repeated. Jason began to suspect something deeper. One day, his friend Ron asked to meet urgently. "Sure, let's grab a beer," Jason agreed. "I can't explain over the phone," Ron insisted. They met at the bar and Ron dropped a bombshell. "I saw your wife today," Ron disclosed. "Yeah, she's in real estate showing houses," Jason shrugged. "I'm certain," Ron affirmed, "but I never knew real estate involved such closeness." "Seriously?" Jason exclaimed. "You must be kidding." "I wish I were," Ron sighed. "I saw Karen with another man, holding hands and kissing. It wasn't innocent." "That can't be right," Jason protested. "Are you sure it was Karen?" Ron showed him a photo, confirming his suspicions. "Damn," Jason muttered, asking for a copy of the picture. "Sure thing," Ron agreed, sending it over. "What's your plan?" "I'm at a loss," Jason admitted. "This blindsided me." "My friend's a PI," Ron offered. "Want me to connect you?" "Please do," Jason requested. "I need answers." After parting ways, Jason found Karen at home. "You're back early," he remarked, surprised. "Just in time," she smiled. "Where were you?" "Having a drink with Ron," he explained. "Everything okay with your friend?" "Not really," Jason shared. "His wife's been unfaithful." "Oh," Karen feigned innocence. "Yeah," Jason replied. "It's a nightmare. I'm glad we don't have those issues." Karen's reaction didn't escape Jason's notice. "It would crush me if you ever betrayed me," he remarked, observing her subtle flinch. "I'd never betray you," she assured, embracing him. "I love you too much." "Glad to hear it," he replied, kissing her. "What brings you home early?" "Our company's convention starts this weekend," she explained. I wanted to pack early and spend time with you before we're apart. Where is it held? He inquired. Las Vegas, at the Westgate Resort Hotel, she answered. Another award this year? He asked, aware of her past achievements. I suppose, she replied. They kissed again, and he suggested celebrating their anniversary in Vegas. She declined, citing work commitments. Disheartened, he agreed to celebrate later. The next day, he contacted Ron for a PI recommendation. Before lunch, he met with the investigator. Good morning, Mr. Chandler. The investigator greeted him in his cluttered office. Glad to meet you, Ron greeted. Call me. Jerry, what's the deal? Jason briefed him on Karen's Vegas trip. Vegas, huh? Jerry mused. You think she's up to something there? Could be, Jason admitted. I've got contacts there who owe me favors, Jerry offered. We'll keep tabs on her and can set up surveillance if you give me a room number. It'll cost extra. Expected as much, Jason nodded. But I need to know the truth. Jerry handed him a digital audio recorder. Easy to use. Just slip it under her car seat, voice activated, retrieve it later. She usually parks at the airport, Jason noted. Perfect. Jerry nodded. We'll handle it. If she slips up, we'll know. Here's my private line for updates. Thanks, Jason said, taking the number. Writing a check from his personal account, not the joint one, he made sure to keep it discreet. They had separate personal accounts and agreed to allocate up to 10% of their earnings. Jason usually spent his on clothes and gifts for Karen, saving for a cruise, until now. That night, Karen packed for the trip. Jason offered to help, noticing her excessive luggage. Curious, he peeked inside and found birth control pills, despite her previous claim of tubal ligation. He photographed her belongings, noting club attire and revealing bikinis, including an open micro bikini he'd never seen her wear. He discreetly placed an audio recorder in her car and ensured it was activated before locking up. This might be the last time, Jason pondered sadly, foreseeing their closeness fading as husband and wife. The next morning, Karen shared her hotel room number and promised nightly calls. Love you, she said, kissing him. Love you too, he replied, watching her drive off. At work, he informed Jerry of Karen's room number. Got it. Thanks, Jerry acknowledged, ready to deploy his team. Later, Karen called from the airport, planning to update him upon check-in. Love you, she reiterated. Love you too, baby, he echoed, internally concealing his doubts. When his father approached, sensing his distress, Jason confided in him. That's rough, son, his father sympathized. I never would have guessed. Same here, Dad, Jason agreed. If you need us, we're here, his father offered. Thanks, Dad, Jason appreciated, leaving work early. He found Karen's car at the airport, retrieving the audio recorder. Despite the tidy car, doubt lingered. On the drive home, Karen called. Hey, just got here, she informed him. Thanks for telling me, he acknowledged. Just settling in, she continued. I'll call you tonight. Love you. Love you too, he reciprocated. At home, he activated the audio recorder, hoping for nothing incriminating. Mostly, there was road noise and her radio. Halfway through, however, reality hit. He listened to her conversation via Bluetooth. Hey, baby, a man's voice greeted. Hello, stallion, she flirted. A stud muffin, Jason scoffed internally. Who's this? Clown. Last week was amazing, the man reminisced. Glad you enjoyed it, she giggled. Plans for next week already arranged? He confirmed. Did you tell your husband? Not yet, she admitted. I've got it handled. He suspect anything? The man inquired. Nothing, she assured. He's clueless. Hope you're right, he said. He'd believe anything, she boasted. Okay, he conceded. Pulling up to the airport, she announced. See you at the hotel tonight. Okay, can't wait, he replied. Bye, love. Bye-bye, she concluded, ending the call. Jason stared at the tape recorder, shocked by what he'd heard. He replayed the recording to ensure he hadn't misinterpreted. She wasn't just cheating, she had plans for their anniversary week that didn't involve him. Frustrated, he cursed internally and pondered the duration of her affair and who her partner was. Grabbing a beer, he sat at his desk, contemplating recent events. Had he overlooked obvious signs? He questioned what else she might be concealing. He had respected her privacy, but now felt compelled to investigate. Knowing where she kept the key, he retrieved it from their jewelry box and headed to her office in the spare bedroom. He accessed the desk, driven by betrayal to investigate. Inside, he uncovered a web of lies. Karen had deceived him throughout their marriage. Shockingly, her personal account held over $250,000, far exceeding their agreed-upon savings limit. Examining her expenses, he found lavish gifts, including a pricey men's Rolex watch likely for her lover. Her purchases also revealed expensive clothing and visits to Planned Parenthood for feticide, which she paid for in cash. He pondered the paternity of the terminated pregnancies and her consistent use of birth control over the years. Additionally, he discovered a receipt for Plan B pills purchased just days earlier. There was more. He found a recent receipt for a hefty down payment on an apartment in an affluent neighborhood, pondering if it would serve as her love nest or an exit strategy. Other receipts revealed payments for utilities and new furniture, prompting him to consider if one of the keys he found was for her new place. Determined to investigate further, he powered up her computer, finding passwords conveniently listed beneath the keyboard. He accessed her email, surprised to find her credentials saved, indicating her confidence in her secrecy. Shockingly, he uncovered exchanges with Greg Wilson detailing their carnal encounters dating back nearly a year when he first noticed changes in her behavior. Initially meeting in hotel rooms, they later rendezvoused in houses she was selling. One email from 6 months prior provided some answers to his questions. "Did you handle that little issue?" Greg inquired. "Yep," Karen replied. "I went and had an infanticide today." "Shame you didn't keep the baby," Greg remarked. "You could have passed it off as Jason's." "I can't do that," she explained. "He thinks I can't conceive. He'd figure out it wasn't his." Reflecting on 6 months ago, Jason realized that was when he first caught her lying. Damn, he thought to himself. She's a deceitful, cheating woman. He scrolled through their emails. Greg had suggested they make love in Karen's marital bed, but she refused. "I won't betray Jason like that," she wrote to Greg. "That idiot has no clue," he replied. "I won't do it," she insisted. "What if you had your own place?" Greg proposed. "You could afford it with your earnings and your husband would be clueless." "Maybe you're onto something," she replied. "I have my own account, and Jason never questions it. I'll start looking." That was 3 months ago. The down payment receipt was just over a month old. "I got a condo," she told Greg. "I put a down payment, and I'm getting furniture next week." Jason's oblivious. "Perfect," Greg responded. "We'll have fun all over that place." Jason was stunned by this news. He kept reading the emails. "Why stay with your husband?" Greg asked. "Why not leave and get your own place?" "Believe it or not, I care for him," Karen said. "He may be a cocky accountant at a tire store chain, but I have feelings for him, and he treats me right. I got the condo so we could meet without risking exposure at hotels. Plus, you're still married." "Hey, just give the word and I'll dump Christy," Greg offered. "She's a headache," Karen wrote. "Let's see after the conference." Jason began printing out Karen's letters and copying the receipts he had discovered. Just as he was doing so, Karen's number flashed on the display. "Hello," he answered cautiously. "It's me, baby," Karen greeted. "Are you okay? You sound off." "Got a pounding headache," he lied, not wanting to tip her off. "Just settling in for the night," she informed. "Take something for that headache and rest. Love you and miss you," she added. "Yeah, same here," he muttered. "Bye." Ending the call, he pondered if she noticed his lack of affectionate words. In truth, he was seething. Determined to uncover the truth about Greg, he scoured Karen's company website and found him, Greg Wilson, the regional manager. She was indeed involved with her boss. Printing the page, he added it to his pile. Growing more agitated, he contemplated breaking into her apartment. Checking her address, he hesitated, wondering about a security system. Reviewing her documents, he spotted a code labeled Alarm System. Of course, she'd write it down, he thought bitterly. Closing her laptop, he left, grabbing latex gloves from the garage to avoid leaving evidence. Finding her complex, he parked in her spot and approached her door. Donning his gloves, he tested a key from her jewelry box. The door yielded, and he entered, spotting the alarm remote. He input the code he discovered and ensured the alarm was disarmed. Switching on the light, he surveyed the apartment, admiring Karen's furniture choices. She's always had good taste, he mused. Shame her loyalty doesn't match her decor preferences. As expected, there were no pictures of him. This was her love nest, her retreat from their marriage. Stepping into the kitchen, he noted a few plates and utensils. The fridge was empty, the pantry bare. Surprisingly, the house was fully furnished, adorned with flower portraits, and boasted a large flat-screen TV. Entering the bedroom, he found it likewise furnished, with lace curtains cascading elegantly over the windows just above the electric heater, an apparent fire hazard. Opening drawers, he discovered unfamiliar underwear and suspected Greg's presence from men's undergarments. Taking out his phone, he snapped photos. In the nightstand drawer, a card from Greg confirmed his suspicions. "Thanks for the watch," it read. "Looking forward to your housewarming. Love Greg. Anger surged. He imagined confronting Greg. More clothing, both male and female, filled the dressing room. In the master bathroom, he noticed 2 toothbrushes by the sink and his and hers towels next to the shower. He grabbed his phone, snapping a few more photos. In the second bedroom, a small desk and chair were the only furnishings. A network cable lay on the desk, likely for her laptop. Amid the letters addressed to her, all from utility companies, he ensured her name and address were visible in the pictures. Lace curtains like those in the bedroom covered the windows here also, draping over the electric heater. He noted several potential fire hazards, including the absence of smoke detectors in the bedrooms and the aged one in the kitchen. He wondered if it even had a battery. Confirming everything was as he found it, he switched off the lights, activated the security system, and departed, double-checking the locked door. Returning to his car, he pondered his next steps. Divorce was inevitable. He couldn't trust her again, even if she severed ties with her lover and relinquished the apartment. Aware men often fare poorly in such situations, he hoped her higher income would spare him alimony. Consulting a lawyer seemed wise before proceeding. He also hoped her sole ownership of the apartment meant he wouldn't have to surrender their home or divide its sale proceeds. He felt she had abandoned him by purchasing the apartment secretly. With no children, custody and support were non-issues, but he wanted retribution for their betrayal. Violence was out of the question. He had no desire for jail time. Returning home, he searched the phone book and located an ad for Gregory Wilson, hoping it was the same Greg Wilson. He dialed the number. "Wilson residence," a woman's voice answered. "Is this Mrs. Wilson?" he inquired. "Yes, it is," she confirmed. "Who am I speaking to?" "Jason Chandler," he introduced himself. "Your husband is the regional manager for Acme Real Estate?" he verified. "Yes, he is," she replied, "but he's away at a conference this weekend and will be visiting other offices next week. You'll need to call the regional office and leave a message for him there." "Actually, Mrs. Wilson, it's you I'd like to speak with," Jason redirected. "Oh?" she responded. "Yes, ma'am," Jason continued. "I hate to break this to you, but my wife is having an affair with your husband." "Are you certain?" she inquired. "Absolutely," Jason asserted, "and I can provide evidence." "Do you have solid proof?" she pressed. "I can even show you where they meet up if you'd like," Jason offered. He heard her sigh through the phone. "Would tomorrow work for you?" she proposed. "Certainly," Jason agreed. "What time suits you best?" "Around 1 in the afternoon," she suggested. Providing her with Karen's apartment address and directions, Jason concluded, "I'll see you then." Before ending the call, grinning, he approached his desk and began drafting a to-do list. First on the agenda, change the door locks, ensuring it was done before meeting Greg's wife at Karen's place. The temptation to drown his sorrows in booze crossed his mind, but he dismissed it, opting instead for a cold pizza slice. He mulled over his options. Satisfied, he ascended the stairs and retired for the night. Early the next day, he visited the hardware store, purchasing supplies to replace the locks and crafting an extra key for the apartment. By noon, all locks were switched. After showering, he grabbed his audio recorder and the printed emails from Karen's account, then headed to her apartment to rendezvous with Greg's wife. Spotting Karen's car, he approached a Toyota Corolla nearby, where an attractive dark-haired woman sat. Knocking on her window, he inquired, "Are you Christy Wilson?" She confirmed her identity, and he opened the door for her. "Call me Jason Chandler," he said, gesturing for her to don latex gloves. He offered, "Let's head in. I'll show you their hideaway." Using the spare key, he successfully unlocked the door, deactivating the security alarm as they entered. Jason guided her into the bedroom, opening drawers and revealing Greg's clothes in the closet. "Oh my God," she exclaimed. "I've been searching for these for weeks. I wondered where his clothes were disappearing." "Has your husband been sporting a Rolex watch lately?" Jason inquired. She affirmed, mentioning it was a gift from management. Shaking his head, Jason retrieved a card from Karen's nightstand, displaying it to her. Reading the note, she burst into tears. "Is that his handwriting?" Jason questioned. "Yes," she sobbed. "But wait, there's more," he added, presenting the emails and activating the audio recorder. Tearfully, she read the emails before listening to the Friday recording. "I'm sorry," Jason said, embracing her and restraining his own emotions. "It's not your fault," she assured. "I've suspected something but lacked proof." Composing herself, she faced him. "So what's the plan?" she inquired. "I'm filing for divorce," he declared, "and I'll kick him out as soon as I lay eyes on him," she vowed. Suddenly she brightened. "I have an idea," she exclaimed. "What if we help them move in together here?" Jason pondered momentarily before smiling. "I like it," he agreed, "but we need to act fast. They'll be back soon." "Greg said he'd be away for a week after the convention," she revealed. I bet Karen will find a reason to leave too. Recalling the recorded conversation, Jason cursed. Damn, you're right, he admitted. But I want her stuff out of my house pronto. Agreed, she concurred. Meet me back here in 3 hours. Sounds good, Jason agreed. I'll bag her stuff. I should be back in time. See you then, she said, rising. Jason observed her, struck by her petite stature and charm. He couldn't fathom why Greg would cheat on her. They left the condo and arrived 3 hours later, their cars brimming with bags of the couple's belongings. Dumping the bags in the sparsely furnished second bedroom, they didn't worry about breakage, knowing it would take the cheating spouses hours to sort through everything. I don't know about you, but I wasn't too careful with his stuff, she remarked. Jason chuckled. Same here, he admitted, sharing a high five with her. Glancing at her, he announced, I don't know about you, but I'm famished. Me too, she agreed. I could really go for a juicy hamburger. A big, cheesy one sounds perfect, he replied. I know just the spot. Care to join me? My treat. Lead the way, she replied. Heading towards the bar he frequented with Ron, she followed. Upon parking, Christy eyed the building skeptically. A bar? She questioned. Trust me, he assured. They serve the best burgers here. You'll love it. Okay, she acquiesced. But I hope you're not planning to ply me with booze and take advantage. Chuckling, he reassured her. As tempting as that sounds, I wouldn't do that, he quipped. Darn, she joked, laughing. Inside, they ordered beers, burgers, and fries, exchanging stories about their failed marriages over the meal. Their narratives shared similarities, meeting in college, quick marriages, but diverging desires regarding children. He inquired if she was a CPA, to which she replied negatively, expressing hopes of pursuing it someday. Jason shared his professional background, mentioning opportunities in his field. Maybe we can help each other out. If you give me your resume, he suggested. I can certainly do that, Mr. Chandler, she responded, taking a bite of her burger. His cell phone interrupted the moment, with Karen's caller ID flashing. Answering in a neutral tone, he greeted, Hello? Karen's voice, slurred from booze, came through. Hey, baby, she chirped. What are you up to? Just grabbing a burger at the bar, he replied. What's going on with you? Guess what? She blurted out. I won the Best Salesperson award, she announced. Before he could respond, he said flatly, Congratulations. Yes, and they want me to stay in Vegas next week to work with their agents, she continued, fabricating. He already knew it was a lie. That's great news, he feigned enthusiasm. What about our anniversary this Wednesday, he reminded her. I know, and I'm sorry, she apologized. Maybe we can celebrate next weekend. No worries, he assured. I understand. Your work is important. I wouldn't want you to miss a big opportunity. What's that supposed to mean? She queried. Nothing. He brushed it off. Just that our 10-year anniversary only happens once, but I know your job matters to you. Don't stress about it. Yes, work matters, but I thought you'd be happy for me, she said. I am, he insisted. Go work with your agents, I'll be fine. I love you, she affirmed. Good, he replied. Me too. Bye. Ending the call, he turned to Christy. That's that, he informed her. She shook her head sympathetically. She picked Greg over your anniversary, she remarked, placing a comforting hand on his. He fought back tears. A man he barely knew showed more concern than his own wife. What a disappointment. I'm sorry, she offered. Thanks, he managed, attempting a smile. He retrieved Jerry's card and dialed his private number. Jerry, he greeted when the older man picked up. Jason Chandler here. Just spoke to Karen and she claims she'll be in Vegas for another week. And you don't buy it? Jerry inquired. Not for a second, Jason confirmed. I was just working on your report, but I'll have my guys surveil them and see what unfolds, Jerry continued. We can proceed. The conference wrapped up a couple of hours ago, and they're apparently enjoying themselves. Most attendees will be heading home tomorrow. Oh, and your wife and her lover spent last night together. I've got footage you might want to see. I'll email it to you, included in my report. That'd be great, Jerry, Jason acknowledged. Thanks. Ending the call, he turned to Christy. Tomorrow, we'll get to the bottom of this, he stated. My PI caught those two lovebirds spending the night together. He's sending over some video footage. Would you care to watch it with me? Not particularly, she admitted, but I feel like I should. Understandingly, he nodded. Well, let's head to my place, he suggested, rising. After settling the bill at the bar, they departed for his house. Once there and settled in his office, the video arrived in his email. Would you like a drink before we start? He offered. Sure, she accepted. Cola if you have it. I'll grab 2 colas, he agreed, heading to the kitchen. Returning with cold sodas, he initiated the video. and they observed Karen and Greg engaging in various carnal acts. Both Christy and Jason struggled to contain their emotions as they witnessed their spouses enjoying each other's company. The ensuing pillow talk was even more heartbreaking. "What do you reckon our spouses are up to right now?" Karen inquired. "If I know Christy, she's probably glued to one of her dull movies," Greg replied, "or nose deep in one of her silly books." "Yeah, I get what you mean," she agreed. "I imagine Jason's buried in another one of his tedious spreadsheets or poring over stock reports." Greg smirked. "You think he's out here saving the world or something? I mean, come on, his old man's company sells tires, for crying out loud. What's the big deal? So, have you decided what you're going to tell that idiot after tomorrow's awards banquet?" "Yep," she confirmed. "I'll just say I was requested to stick around in Vegas for a week, filling in for the local reps. He'll swallow it. Hell, he'd believe anything I'd tell him. I could tell him the moon's made of green cheese, and he'd buy it. And by the time he catches on, we'll be lounging on a beach in Hawaii," Greg added. "I can't wait to see you flaunting that new sling bikini you snagged." "Hawaii?" Christy erupted. "That idiot's whisking some floozy off to Hawaii? I'm going to rip his guts out." She turned to Jason. "Sorry for calling your wife a floozy." "No need to apologize," he responded. "I'd say the same thing." They refocused on the video. "So, what about your anniversary? Are you just going to skip it?" "Hawaii sounds a lot more enticing than a night at a steakhouse," she remarked. "I pledged to make it up to him. Maybe I will, maybe I won't." Greg regarded her. "You're ice cold, you know that?" he remarked. She shrugged. "It's only our 10th anniversary," she explained. "There'll be more. Who cares about that? Right now, I need you." With those words, they resumed their activities, prompting Jason to halt the video. "I've seen plenty," he stated. "Have you?" Christy nodded, tears flowing down her cheeks. "More than plenty," she affirmed. "I'm scheduling a meeting with a divorce attorney come Monday," he disclosed. "Would you like to accompany me?" "Would you mind?" she asked softly. "Not at all," he reassured. Christy burst into tears, sobbing. Jason wrapped his arm around her, offering a comforting shoulder. Though he felt like crying too, he held back, focusing on consoling her amidst his own emotional turmoil. "Would it bother you if I spent the night here?" she inquired. "No hanky-panky. I just want to cuddle," she clarified. "Of course, you're welcome to stay," he replied. "Stay as long as you like." "Thank you," she expressed. "I can't believe I wasted all those years on that idiot. All this time, I've been falling for his lies." "I totally get it," Jason empathized. He escorted her upstairs to the master bedroom and found an old t-shirt that appeared. Long enough for her to sleep in. Taking it, she retreated to the bathroom to change. After waiting for her return, he donned his pajamas and settled into bed. She emerged from the bathroom wearing the long t-shirt, and he was almost taken aback by her appearance. He always admired Karen's legs, but Christy's were the slenderest he'd ever seen. She smiled as she slipped under the covers. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Never seen a woman's legs before?" "None as lovely as yours," Jason complimented. "Sweet talk will get you everywhere, sir," she teased. He wrapped his arm around her, drawing her close, savoring her scent. She placed her hand on his chest, snuggling against him. "Did you know you're the only woman I've shared a bed with besides my wife for over 10 years?" he confessed. "And you're the only man I've been with besides my husband," she revealed. They gazed into each other's eyes for what felt like an eternity before drifting off to sleep in each other's arms. The next morning, they woke up entwined with each other. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she greeted. "You don't need to rush out on my account," she added as he rose to use the bathroom. "Good morning, beautiful," he responded. "I'll be quick." He relieved himself in the bathroom, which proved challenging given his state of arousal. Upon returning, he found Christy already tidying up the kitchen and preparing scrambled eggs and bacon for breakfast. Glancing at the clock, he noted it was 8:30 a.m. His gaze returned to Christy, enjoying the sight of her cooking in his old t-shirt, momentarily reminiscing about the times Karen used to make breakfast for them. "Wow, that smells amazing," he remarked. "I hope you don't mind me taking over your kitchen," she said. "Not at all," he assured her. "I can't recall the last time someone made me breakfast." "Karen never cooked for you?" she inquired. "She used to," he acknowledged, "but she stopped a while back. Claimed it took too much time and she needed to prepare for her clients." "Damn," Christy muttered. "Exactly," he concurred. The aroma of bacon filled the air as she placed a generous plate in front of him. He devoured the meal hungrily as if he hadn't eaten in weeks. "Wow, that was amazing. Do you cook like this every morning?" "Whenever I can," she replied. His phone interrupted, displaying Jerry's name and number. "Hey Jerry," he greeted. "Working Sundays?" "More often than I'd like," he admitted. "I wanted to update you. Your wife and her lover boarded their flight from Las Vegas just before 6 this morning." They had a layover in Los Angeles for about 40 minutes, and the plane departed an hour ago. They'll touch down in Honolulu in approximately 5 hours. I've got the flight details if you need them. Got it, Jason confirmed. They're on American Airlines Flight 31, Jerry added. I've got a contact in Honolulu ready to track them once they land. Thanks, Jerry, Jason said, jotting down the information. After ending the call, he turned to Christy. Well, he began, here's the update. They're en route to Hawaii. As the plane ascended, Karen settled into her seat. Glancing out the window, she watched as they flew over the Pacific Ocean. This is it, she mused to herself. Glancing to her left, she noticed Greg already asleep in the neighboring seat. She closed her eyes, briefly reflecting on the past decade. Brief pangs of guilt swept over her for betraying her trusting husband. Somewhere deep down, she acknowledged this as just another in a series of poor choices, yet she justified it to herself. She hoped it would all resolve without Jason ever finding out. Perhaps their marriage would continue, and they would grow old together, eventually retiring peacefully. Her initial misstep was disclosing to Jason that she couldn't conceive. In reality, she was capable, but she harbored no desire for a family. Motherhood might allure some, but not her. Thus, she informed Jason of purported medical hurdles necessitating tubal ligation. He accepted, eventually consenting. However, complications with the IUD arose, compelling her to discontinue its use due to pelvic discomfort and headaches. She resorted to conventional birth control pills, supplementing with the calendar rhythm method to avoid physical engagement during peak fertility. Though mostly effective, she found herself pregnant twice. The first instance occurred with her husband. Fearing his response, which would unveil her initial deceit and her reluctance for parenthood, she discreetly underwent an infanticide, financing it privately. Luckily, they had established separate accounts alongside a joint one. Initially, they agreed on her contributing 10% of her earnings to the joint account, but she manipulated the arrangement. She could have funded the infanticide independently, keeping Jason unaware. The second pregnancy arose with Greg approximately 6 months prior. She divulged the situation to her paramour and opted for another infanticide, covering the cost from her personal account, hoping Jason would remain oblivious. Then came her extramarital affairs. Throughout the initial 7 years of marriage, she remained loyal to her husband. However, everything shifted one day when she encountered a client, strikingly handsome and affluent. In a fleeting moment, she made a decision she never regretted. They engaged in intense, passionate closeness within the confines of a lavish house she was showcasing. And he exhibited gratitude by purchasing the property outright. Such encounters were infrequent, maybe occurring 10 times over the subsequent year and a half. Later, she discovered others engaged in similar behaviors. Though she experienced fleeting guilt, she reasoned, what the heck, if other women could indulge without consequence, why couldn't she? In her view, it bore no relation to Jason. Her love for him remained steadfast, and what he didn't know wouldn't cause injury. Then she encountered Greg, and everything altered. He embodied everything her husband lacked. Jason was analytical, pondering decisions meticulously, whereas Greg was impulsive, deciding on a whim. Jason's path in life, both personally and professionally, had been predetermined. He dedicated his career to his father's tire business, a trajectory he continued, set to ascend to CFO and ultimately president and CEO. Conversely, Greg's future was uncertain. He embraced each day as it came, living in the moment, while Jason contemplated the future. Their approaches in bed were starkly different. Jason prioritized her pleasure, while Greg was more forceful, leaving her feelings shattered. Initially, their liaisons occurred in discreet motels or houses they were selling, but she grew apprehensive about being spotted and alerting Jason or Greg's wife, Christy. Then, after Jason voiced concerns about their relationship, she distanced herself from Greg momentarily, redirecting her affection toward her husband. However, her resolve waned, and Greg sought to reconcile, but she feared Jason discovering their affair. To mitigate this risk, she decided to purchase her own apartment, providing a private sanctuary for her and Greg. Despite Jason's conservative demeanor, she harbored lingering emotions for him. Their decision to file tax returns separately facilitated her departure with Greg while still benefiting from tax breaks. It seemed like a win-win situation, or so she convinced herself. These events culminated in her plan to spend a week in Hawaii with Greg, masking her absence from the office as a vacation with her husband after their corporate meeting. Simultaneously, Greg informed his wife of his upcoming travels, a routine occurrence. She deceived Jason, claiming a week-long trip to Vegas, confident that he would believe her every word. Although she regretted missing their 10th wedding anniversary, she vowed to compensate upon her return, ensuring her secret remained intact. She grinned as she gazed at the azure water beneath them, thoughts drifting to Hawaii. Greg had purchased a daring open bikini for their trip, eager to watch her undress and indulge in beachside self-pleasure. The notion stirred arousal between her thighs, tempting her to succumb to the urge right then and there. Contemplating a clandestine bathroom rendezvous later, she glanced at her phone, half expecting a message from Jason. His preference for calls or face-to-face communication didn't surprise her. A smirk played on her lips. A sudden shudder and change in engine pitch hinted at turbulence as the plane dipped, and the engines altered their tone. Dread crept in. Glancing out the window, she realized the gravity of the situation. Panic erupted in the cabin, gravity pressing her into her seat. The sight outside confirmed their descent. Oh God, she thought, resignation flooding her. This is it. We're going down. I'm going to die. Oxygen masks deployed. Passengers, including Greg, screamed as flight attendants braced them for the inevitable. Tears streaming, she cast a final glance at her phone, steeling herself for one last decision. Jason and Christy wrapped up breakfast, tidying away the last of the dishes before returning to the table to strategize about their unfaithful partners. Jason admired Christy's analytical skills, feeling a newfound closeness with her that had been absent with Karen for months. As he returned to the table with a fresh cup of coffee, his phone buzzed, displaying Karen's name and number. Putting it on speaker, he answered, greeted by Karen's panicked voice amidst background clamor and distant shouts. "Jace," she yelled, barely audible over the chaos. "Karen, what's happening?" he asked, straining to hear. "Plane down. Sorry." Her voice crackled before the call abruptly ended. Stunned, Jason and Christy exchanged glances. Attempting to call Karen back proved futile as it went straight to voicemail. Turning to Christy, Jason urged her to contact Greg. Rushing to retrieve her phone from her purse, Christy dialed Greg's number, but it too went unanswered, diverting to voicemail. Jason headed to his home office, powering up his computer to seek more information. After finding the airline's contact number through a search engine, he dialed and, after initial refusal, managed to speak with someone who confirmed they were investigating reports of the plane crash. Leaving his and Christy's contact details along with Karen and Greg's, he was assured they would be notified of any updates. With nothing further to find online, he estimated it would be at least an hour before they received any news. They headed to the front room, switching on the TV in hopes of catching any news updates. Jason flicked through channels, but there was no breaking news. Reflecting on the events leading up to this moment, he glanced at his phone. Finally, a news network flashed a report that an American Airlines flight bound for Honolulu had crashed in the Pacific Ocean, though without providing specifics. "Oh God," Christy exclaimed, her hand covering her mouth. Jason embraced her, silently praying for Karen's safety. Despite the strain in their marriage, he couldn't bear the thought of her perishing. An hour later, the phone rang. Jason muted the TV and answered. "Mr. Chandler?" a woman's voice inquired. "Speaking," he confirmed. "I'm calling to inform you that your wife's flight has crashed," she relayed. "I have no further details at this time, but we will update you as soon as we learn more." "Thank you," Jason responded, ending the call. He and Christy held each other, tears welling in their eyes. Shortly after, Christy's phone rang, delivering the same grim news. Soon after, his father called. It wasn't uncommon. His parents often reached out upon hearing news like this. "Hey Jace," his father greeted. "Hi Dad, how are you?" Jason replied. "Just got back from church." "Did you see the news about the accident?" his father inquired. "Yes, I did," Jason confirmed. "It's awful," his father lamented. "By the way, how's Karen? Wasn't she on her way back from Vegas?" "She's not doing well, Dad," Jason disclosed. "She was on that plane that crashed." "What?" his father gasped. "What was she doing going to Hawaii without you?" "She was with her boyfriend," Jason disclosed. "Oh my God," his father reacted. "I'm sorry to hear that, son. Take a week off and sort things out. Let Mike know if there's anything we can do. Just give me a call, okay?" "Thanks, Dad," Jason expressed gratefully. He wrapped up the call, his mind swirling with a mix of emotions. On one hand, he felt deep sorrow knowing Karen was likely gone, yet anger simmered within him for her betrayal, as well as at himself for not standing up to her. Strangely, the absence of divorce didn't disturb him, however. The realization of shouldering Karen's final expenses, including the apartment, jolted him. "Damn," he muttered. He glanced at Christy, pondering how she'd cope. What steps would she take? An idea struck him, prompting him to approach her. "Christy," he began, "why not sell your apartment and move in here with me?" She met his gaze, tears brimming in her eyes. Are you serious? She questioned. Absolutely, he affirmed. There's a spare room upstairs, and with the upcoming challenges, maybe we can support each other through it all. After a moment's consideration, she responded, Why not, but under one condition. What's that? He inquired. That I share your bed, she stated. Really? Jason's thoughts raced, realizing things were moving quicker than anticipated. Dismissing doubts, he resolved to seize the moment. Sure, he agreed. It's been ages since I felt genuinely comfortable with my husband. Last night was the first time in years I felt fulfilled. Is that all right? More than all right, he assured her. Then it's settled, she confirmed. I'll grab my belongings from home and be back tonight. Jason nodded. I'll be here, he promised. After she departed, he dialed Lucy, Karen's colleague. Hello, she greeted. Lucy, it's Jason Chandler, he identified himself. Oh, hi Jason, she responded. How is Hawaii? I'm not sure, he admitted. I hear it's lovely this time of year. Why? Lucy's tone shifted. Karen mentioned you two were heading there after the company meeting. I assumed you were en route. Actually, Jason clarified, Karen went, but not with me. She went with Greg. What? Lucy exclaimed, taken aback. That's right, Jason affirmed. However, neither of them made it. The plane they were on crashed in the Pacific Ocean today. You might have seen it in the news. Oh no, Lucy gasped. Do you know if she survived? I doubt. Any of them did, Jason responded solemnly. I'm deeply sorry, Lucy offered her sympathies. Please accept my condolences. Also, the company has life insurance for all employees. I'll handle the paperwork, but I'll need details from the airline. Can you provide them? Yes, I'll gather what I can, Jason promised. But I have a question for you. What's that? Lucy inquired. Were you aware of Karen's affair with Greg? Jason queried. I had my suspicions, Lucy admitted. There were whispers, but nothing concrete. We tend not to gossip about personal matters in the office. I understand, Jason acknowledged. Well, that's all for now. I'll be in touch. Thank you, Lucy responded. And again, my condolences. That evening, while watching television with Christy, a news report about the crash aired. It stated that the plane's final moments were captured by a crew member aboard a cargo airliner only a couple of miles from the crash site. The TV station aired an amateur video showing the plane rapidly descending nose first. The plane appeared to disintegrate upon impact with the water. The report conveyed the cargo ship altered its course to assist in the search for survivors. While they retrieved several bodies from the water, unfortunately, there were no survivors. Additionally, they recovered a significant amount of luggage, which included belongings belonging to Karen and Greg. However, their bodies were not among those recovered. In the following months, Jason and Christy experienced a whirlwind of activity. Christy moved in with Jason and sold her own house. Jason had to handle Karen's apartment, which held nothing of value to him. Consequently, he donated everything to Goodwill, which gladly accepted it. Later, he sold the apartment, recouping Karen's original investment. Both Jason and Christy received a $500,000 insurance payout from Acme Real Estate for the loss of their spouses. They promptly began erasing any remnants of Karen from their lives. They discarded photos, stowed away knickknacks, and replaced furniture, especially the bed. Family members took what they wanted, and the rest, including 2 cars, was either sold, donated, or scrapped. Jason also navigated the complexities of closing Karen's bank accounts. After months of paperwork, Jason received a check for approximately $250,000. Lawyers approached Jason and Christy, seeking to profit from the accident. Further investigation revealed that the crew misinterpreted onboard computer warnings and made incorrect decisions. The plane descended at a rate of about 12,000 feet per minute, crashing into the water at roughly 135 miles per hour, a journey lasting just over 3 minutes. Jason imagined Karen's last moments, some spent on the phone with him, as harrowing. He believed her final act was one of regret, realizing she was hurtling towards her demise with no chance of escape. Nevertheless, Jason deemed it too little too late. Fortunately, the airline reached a settlement with all affected families, compensating each passenger with just over $175,000. Jason and Christy received a total of over $1.6 million. After accounting for taxes, they still had a substantial sum. Since neither Karen's nor Greg's remains were recovered, no funeral took place. However, Jason and Christy organized memorial services, mainly for their families. They didn't shed tears for their deceased spouses. 3 months into her tenure, Christy left her job to move in permanently with Jason. By then, they were deeply in love. One evening, while dining at a local Texas roadhouse, Jason proposed to Christy on one knee. She joyfully accepted, eliciting applause from nearby patrons. "It's high time you made an honest woman out of me," she whispered to him. "Why?" he asked. "Because you're going to be a father," she revealed. Overwhelmed with joy, Jason showered her with kisses. "I love you more than anything," he expressed. "And I love you even more," she reciprocated. "Just one request." "What is it?" he inquired. "Please don't ask me to fly anywhere," she pleaded. Laughing, Jason embraced her tightly. "Don't worry, my dear," he assured her. My father has always blamed my sister for my mother's death, and now that my little sister called me daddy, he regrets it. I, 24 male, am the older brother to my little sibling, 5 female. I was always the one who had to take care of my sister. For the sake of privacy, I'll call her Belle. For some background, my parents had me as teenagers. They were 15 and 16 at the time, and even as a kid, I could always feel that they regretted having me. After I was born, both my mother and father were practically disowned by their family. My mother had to drop out of high school to take care of me, while my father worked 2 jobs just to provide. And even then, they couldn't afford a home. They lived with my mother's older sister until I was 9. My father got his GED and managed to get a better job and move us out. Despite the fact our living situation was better, it was clear to me that they believed their lives were ruined because of me. Whenever I misbehaved, like any normal child, they'd use the fact that they gave up their lives for me, and I still had the audacity to behave like this. And even when I never misbehaved, they never treated me with much love. I barely got to get new clothing. They'd get my clothes from Goodwill and practically refused to get me anything nice unless they had to. Birthdays, parties, meeting friends, and their wedding. My birthdays were always celebrated with the bare minimum. They'd get me a cupcake and a single gift, nothing that I wanted. Despite everything, I was still a child who just wanted their love. But as I grew older, I began to accept I wouldn't get it and made peace with that. I guess somewhere along the line, when my parents realized I gave up on them, as throughout my teen years, they, mainly my mother, began to treat me better. But at that point, I wasn't the child who begged for their love anymore. I never received the love of my parents, and I wasn't asking for it anymore. Although I can't say I kept hating them, in fact, my feelings began to feel neutral towards them. In my eyes, we were practically strangers. I never got to know them truly, as they raised me with the bare minimum and never had any real conversations with me. They never spent any quality time with me. They also knew nothing about me, so them suddenly trying to play parents with me was awkward, to say the least. When I was 18, my mother got pregnant, and I guess that was when they gave up on trying to fix things with me, as they could have a new child to start over with. They didn't treat me poorly again, but instead, it felt like we were strangers living in the same home. When I turned 19, my mother gave birth to a girl, but due to some complications, she didn't end up surviving. This crushed my father. Not only did he begin to resent me for not being as sad as he was over her death, she was barely a mother to me, so there wasn't much to be sad over, but he also blamed his daughter for killing his wife. He was never home after the incident, and I was left taking care of my sister. I ended up having to take a break from college after the time I came home from my classes to my sister screaming with hunger in an unchanged diaper while my father was out drinking. I took care of Belle full-time and called out my father multiple times, but he always got angry and ended the conversation with him saying I could always leave Belle at the fire station. I eventually gave up on forcing him to be a father. Despite everything, I truly loved Belle. She was the sweetest and cutest kid. She was almost always smiling and surprisingly slept through the night. Once she was old enough, I enrolled her in daycare and continued my education while working night shifts. I always made sure to leave a good portion of afternoons empty so I could spend time with her. She always knew who her actual father was, and as she grew older, she began to try and spend time with him, I guess. As she began to follow him around the house. Of course, that quickly ended after he blew up on her, and she began to fear him. I realized she saw me as a parental figure, despite the fact she knew I was her brother. When she was old enough for preschool, I found out she was telling people I was her father. I never mentioned it to her and just let it be until she gave her Father's Day card she made in preschool to me. I then told her if she wanted, she could call me Dad, and since then she's been calling me Daddy. My father ended up getting a girlfriend and began to change himself as he stopped drinking, got a better job, and even began to take over the majority of the bills, other than the portion I agreed to pay to stay living here. He never really tried being a father to Belle. He did begin to eat breakfast with us, but that breakfast was spent in silence other than me and Belle talking. Fast forward to a few months ago on Belle's birthday, I had planned a party for her and invited her preschool class. My father ended up attending as I guess his girlfriend thought it would be a good time to meet his daughter, as she was the one who looked excited to be here. Anyways, While she was opening gifts, I surprised her with one of those kids' electric cars. She screamed and hugged me, yelling how she loved me and called me daddy. After the party and after Belle was fast asleep, my father asked me what the hell happened. I was confused, refused to answer until he yelled, asking why his daughter was calling me daddy. I asked him if he seriously didn't know why, and told him that I was the one who raised her. I bought her everything. I celebrated her firsts. I was the one who didn't abandon her. He was quiet and went to bed. Since then, he's tried to play father and talk to her, but he was a stranger to her. She was a sweet girl, so she entertained my father's conversation, but he could tell how awkward she felt, and it was clear it hurt him. Despite how selfish it is, I don't want their relationship to get better. After all, just as she saw me as her dad, I saw her as my daughter. I graduated college and I'm looking for a better job so I can move Belle and me into our own home. I may be a bad person for enjoying my father's misery and regret, realizing he ruined his chances of having a relationship with his daughter, but I'll never be as bad as him. Edit. Thank you guys for all the support and advice. As people suggested, I might be deleting this post soon to avoid any chance of my father finding out before I'm ready for the custody battle. I'll use the advice you guys gave me. I know it was risky posting it here as people can find out, but I never had anyone to talk to about all of this before. So it was nice to be able to let everything out for the first time. Story 2. My wife told my AP, I'd rather be 80-year-old me than 20-year-old you, and it haunts me every day. My wife and I were high school sweethearts. We are both 40 and have been together for 25 years. We have 2 children together, 5 and 6. For the past 5 years, I have thought that we are together because we basically grew up together. I met my now GF, 2008. I know I'm 12 years older, but I met her at work. She is beautiful and attractive, and I thought she was this new change I wanted. Instead of breaking it off with my ex and doing the right thing, I cheated and I got caught. My wife was so gracious about it, she didn't want us to be together anymore. This was a year ago, and I left our house and rented an apartment. We have yet to start divorce proceedings, although I don't want to. Neither of us was talking about it. My GF, however, is not so happy about this, mainly because I left our big house, that's originally my house, to my wife and daughters. I inherited it from my grandparents and parents, and it is worth a fortune right now. My GF thinks that it is my family home, and for me, yes, it is. My family is living there. But my GF meant that when we get divorced, my wife has no claim to the house. 3 weeks ago, my GF and I were dropping our daughters with their mother, and my GF went against my wishes and started talking to my wife about the house. My wife was confused and said that the house is hers and her daughter's. She looked at me, all confused, but my GF told her that it was mine and it was time to move on. My wife then said that my GF should put her nose in other people's business. My GF became angry and said that my wife is a hag who is bitter because she's old. My wife smiled and said, "Is your age your only redeeming quality? Because that won't last." Then she said that she'd rather be 80-year-old herself than 20-year-old my GF. She wasn't angry or bitter. She isn't old either. She is 40 like me. Am I so old? According to my GF, she's very beautiful too. I don't know what my GF was thinking. I felt so ashamed and angry with myself. My GF was immature and embarrassing. I have been unhappy for months now, but if I broke it off, it means that I have hurt my family for nothing. My wife called me the next day and said that maybe we should start talking about divorce. I broke down crying the moment we ended the call. Now, every time I see her, I want to be in her arms and cry, just thinking about 80-year-old her with 80-year-old me beside her, the way we envisioned ourselves every time we saw an elderly couple holding hands or kissing. And we thought, this will be us too. I realized I'd rather have 80-year-old her than 20-year-old anyone, but I have messed that up.
My husband and I first met when we were both 22 years old at his best friend's wedding. I instantly fell in love with him, and it seemed like he had some interest in me as well. The day after the wedding, we had our first date in the park, and our relationship quickly became intense. Felix was everything I ever wanted in a partner. Smart, kind, good-looking, caring, strong, and fair. He was always there for me when I needed support, comforted me during tough times, and helped with my problems. He wasn't just my rock, he was my ideal man, and I loved him completely. After a year, we decided to move in together, and a year later, we got married. However, our marriage had its share of challenges. My husband was hardworking and shared household chores with me, but financial issues began to strain our young family, leading to occasional conflicts. During one of our fights, I left home for 2 weeks. Felix, who usually avoided confrontation, was slow to make amends, and my pride stopped me from reaching out first. I waited for him to make the first move. During that time, Felix's best friend Daima, who was also my friend, offered support when he saw how troubled I was. Our conversations turned passionate, leading to a night we spent together. I saw it as payback for Felix's indifference. But just 3 days later, Felix came to me with roses, apologized, and begged for my return. I realized my mistake, but it was too late. We reconciled, and things got better. Then, I discovered I was pregnant, and to my shock, the child was not Felix's, but Daima's. I struggled with this revelation, but it was too late. So, the choice of whether to have the child or not was out of my hands. I gave birth to my son 6 months later, and I cried every night, regretting my foolishness and losing the love of my life. I knew I had to confess, but I couldn't bear to break Felix's heart. Throughout my pregnancy, he was overjoyed, proudly telling everyone about his beloved wife giving him a son. His emotional moment at the maternity hospital, holding our child and calling him my son, my joy, my daddy's pride, is etched in my memory. I had planned to tell him the truth when our son was older, but that moment never came, and I continued to lie. 14 years passed, and our family seemed harmonious. I buried my deceit because being a father means more than just biological ties. But, as they say, secrets have a way of coming to light. One day, Felix found the unsent letters I had written to Daima. When I came home, he was standing in the dark, holding those letters. It shattered my soul. He said nothing, and his eyes held no emotion. I cried, begged for forgiveness, and tried to explain, but he remained silent. In that silence, I realized the depth of my wrongdoing and was ready to face any consequences. Felix just moved away from the window, sat on the couch, and cried. Seeing this, I lost control and became hysterical, sobbing uncontrollably. He left without a word, and I kept crying, realizing I had destroyed his life. My husband and I are both 38 years old, and our son Tom was at the center of our world. We had hoped for another child, but my health issues prevented it. Felix had dedicated his life to raising his best friend's child, his pride, and now he knows it's all a lie. That night, all I could think of was my terrible mistake. I wanted to die, but my love for our son stopped me. The next morning, Felix packed his things and left, ignoring my pleas to stay. It's been 2 months, and I'm still searching for a chance to beg for his forgiveness. I may be a fool, but I believe I have a chance because Felix hasn't filed for divorce and still communicates with our son. Daima only found out he was the father a year after the birth. I thought it wouldn't affect him, but to my surprise, he developed paternal feelings. He offered to raise our child because he and his wife had none, but I refused, as I loved only Felix. Tom felt only friendly sympathy for his biological father, and I didn't want to disrupt his family. I begged Daima not to interfere, emphasizing my love for my husband, our son, and our family. Daima sent money as unofficial child support, but I refused. Eventually, he walked out of our lives, though he and Felix remained friends until the truth came out. As for the letters, I kept them out of sentimentality, but it ultimately cost me my family. My husband has always been a great man. After our first big fight, I made a foolish decision to stay with my brother for 2 weeks. We had a good, friendly relationship. After the argument with Felix, we often talked on the phone. He tried to calm me down and convince me to return to my husband. But I was waiting for Felix to reach out, not his friend, and he stayed silent. One evening, when my brother was out, Daima called and offered to come over, saying that these things happen in many families at first, and I needed a distraction. I agreed, and without much thought, he came over. And then today, my son came home after spending the weekend with his father and mentioned they discussed the future of our family. I've been anxious all day, wondering what Felix told his son. If he's willing to come back, he wouldn't lie to our child. Except for that one time, I haven't cheated on my husband in our 16 years together. It was my only mistake. My son doesn't know who his real father is, and hopefully he never will. He deeply loves Felix, trusts him, and is proud to have him as a father. Their bond is even stronger than the one he shares with me. If he found out the truth now, it would break his heart. In any case, a lot has changed this week. Last weekend, my son talked to Felix about the future of our family. Felix didn't give a definite answer, but didn't rule out the possibility of us reuniting. On Tuesday, I asked my husband out for a date at a restaurant, and to my surprise, Felix agreed, boosting my confidence for a positive outcome. We didn't stay at the restaurant for long, choosing a long 4-hour walk in the park. During our time together, we reminisced about our past and our love, smoothly transitioning to discussing our future. I pleaded with my husband to return to the family, and though he didn't say it outright, it was clear he wanted the same. That night, I purposely sent my son to spend the night at a friend's house, freeing the apartment for my beloved to join me. We spent the night together, just like in the old days. The next morning, our conversation was brief as we rushed to work. In the evening, as my son and I were having dinner, Felix unexpectedly arrived with his belongings. Words can't express the joy in that moment, and my son was thrilled to see his father. I wonder if Felix has truly forgiven me. My biggest fear is that after living with me for a while, he might decide he no longer wants this family. But I love him deeply, and I know I betrayed him. I'm willing to do anything to make amends. Since his return, my husband hasn't brought up the issue of paternity, and though he acknowledges what happened, he doesn't show anger or negativity toward me. Crucially, his relationship with Tom remains unaffected, which was a major concern for me. Last night, we talked about our son's future, and we both agreed that he would likely move out in a few years. Felix expressed his joy at being a father, and it got us thinking about having another child. I plan to see a doctor soon, and my husband was genuinely excited about the idea. It's been over a month since my last message. I've started treatment, and my beloved has been supportive throughout, not dwelling on the past. According to the doctors, I have a good chance of conceiving and having a child after the treatment. The process is expensive and time-consuming, but my husband and I are ready to face any challenges for our happiness. In retrospect, I recognize the enormity of my mistake, but time cannot be rewound. I must take responsibility and live with the consequences of my actions. Things have taken a different turn in the family of my child's biological father. Felix and Daima haven't communicated for months, and I thought it was the end of their story. However, I was wrong. Daima's wife found out that he had a child with me, and her pain and frustration are indescribable. She feels the same betrayal my husband experienced a few months ago, betrayed by her beloved husband and her best friend. We had one conversation, if you can call it that, with her yelling, crying, and even slapping me a few times. Since then, we haven't spoken, and I haven't attempted to contact her. I understand that she will never forgive me. I had hoped she would come to her senses and give her husband another chance. However, last week, she filed for divorce and kicked Daima out of the house. What pains me the most in this story are their 2 young daughters, aged 12 and 5, and now their family is shattered because of my fault, my mistakes. 6 people have suffered because of me. My beloved husband, who dedicated his whole life to his family. My son, who will never know that his beloved father, whom he idolizes, is not his biological father. My best friend, who lost her marriage because of me and is now left alone with 2 children. Her 2 little daughters, who lost their favorite daddy, and Dima himself. He lost the most in this story, a friend with whom they had been inseparable for more than 15 years. His wife, who now doesn't want to see him. His daughters, whom Nasty doesn't even allow to talk to their father, and convinces them that he is a traitor, his apartment, which he worked hard for, and which will now be taken by his ex-wife. All this suffering, all this pain, it's all my fault. I don't know if I have the right to have children at all. Why did my lover forgive me? Why? If I were in his shoes, I wouldn't even look at me. I started therapy so we could have a child of our own, but it didn't work out. In the end, we decided it's not worth it. These treatments are costly and unlikely to succeed. My husband initially reacted normally, or so it seemed, but later I realized how much pain he was in. The worst thing happened at the end of the summer. It was exactly what I had feared. Our son discovered the truth, a day I'll never forget. I wish I could forget, but I can't. I genuinely believed I could shield my child from the consequences of my wrongdoing. I hoped and prayed, but it was all in vain. When Tom learned the truth, something within him broke. He transformed from a sweet, kind boy, dearly loved and caring towards his family, into a different person within days. For nearly 4 months now, we've been living through a nightmare. My son has started drinking, smoking, staying out late at night, and we have no idea where he goes the rest of the time. He's made some unsettling friends, and just the sight of them gives me the creeps. Rough-looking kids with a bad reputation throughout the neighborhood. The police know me well, but they've done nothing. It's a family issue. Deal with it. We've got more important matters to attend to. That's all we hear. My son also hates Felix now, even though they were close before. What did he say to his father? I understand that he's just a child suffering due to my mistakes, but my husband didn't deserve this. He endured so much when the truth about Tom came out, and then we had to give up having a child of our own. And now, this living hell. A month ago, Felix started experiencing heart problems. He was hospitalized with symptoms resembling a heart attack. Thankfully, it wasn't a heart attack, but he's on medication and might need surgery down the road. The doctors have warned him to avoid stress, but my son seizes every opportunity to provoke him. I try to intervene, but my husband sees me as being helpless. I witness his pain and resentment daily. He spends days in bed in silence. I've told him that depression could break his heart, but he doesn't listen. We're only 39 years old, yet in this time, he's aged visibly, looking 50 and constantly appearing sad. I have developed wrinkles and deep bags under my eyes. I'm living in a hell of my own making. Every day, I berate myself for my mistake, my betrayal, and pray for peace and harmony in our family. But I no longer believe in that, not in God, not in a happy ending for us. Now I realize how foolish I was to think I could escape the consequences of my actions. I carry the weight of ruining the lives of 6 people, and it's a heavy burden on my conscience. Daima, on the other hand, has it even worse. Nasty divorced him and took him to court over their property, leaving him homeless. She's spiraled into a life of partying, drinking, and changing partners weekly, unable to recover from the betrayal of her husband and me, her best friend, almost like a sister. I've tried to talk to her several times, but she becomes hysterical upon seeing me, leading to heated arguments. She's always been morally weak, and I shattered her. Their daughters now live with Nasty in a 1-room apartment to avoid her different partners. I haven't heard from Dima for 6 months since their divorce. Total silence. December 31st should be a time of happiness, joy, and celebration, but not for me. My husband went to visit his parents in another city, and as for Tom, I have no idea where he is. He doesn't answer his phone. I've lost all my friends. Our family has been shunned since everything came to light, and it feels as if we're treated like outcasts. I sit at the table with a bottle, crying, not out of joy, but out of loneliness. This story took place last year when my husband and I were on vacation in Croatia. On the first day at lunch, we met a married couple, but their origin isn't that important. They had been there for 2 days already, making them experienced compared to us. Ron and Molly were passionate about scuba diving, just like my husband, Stephen. We spent most of our time together, sharing meals, diving, shopping, and attending various evening events. The only time we didn't meet was at breakfast because Molly was a late riser, and I didn't mind spending the morning on my own. But as I tend to get bored quickly, I'd head to the beach in the morning or later in the evening when it was cooler. During breakfast, we sat with different neighbors, usually 2 younger guys. Although I hadn't paid much attention to them, one spoke English well with a slight accent, while the other remained quiet and smiled. I pondered for a while about their origin, considering various possibilities, but eventually settling on them being Swedes or Germans. I was curious to see if I was right, but it felt somewhat awkward to ask. Our interactions were limited to exchanging greetings and wishing each other a good meal. We followed a routine during our vacation, one that we hardly deviated from. In the mornings, Molly and Ron would head to the beach. Later, when it got hot, we'd either return to our rooms or explore the city once the weather cooled down. Diving was part of the plan, then back to the beach until almost sunset, and finally, visiting a bar or cafe for some dancing in the evenings. In contrast to them, I didn't take up scuba diving, despite my husband's attempts to get me interested. I had a fear of diving to significant depths, where panic would set in, and I worried about running out of air. I couldn't conquer this fear, and my husband eventually went diving without me. Instead, I'd stay on the boat, swim around it, or sunbathe on the deck. After a few days of this, I got tired and began spending time at the hotel pool, swimming or relaxing by the poolside with magazines as my companions. One day, I was at the pool, either refreshing myself or reading a magazine when, suddenly, right by my ear, a voice greeted me with, "Good afternoon." Even though it wasn't spoken loudly, I was startled, and the magazine slipped from my hands. I instantly recognized the voice with its distinctive accent, hard to forget. Turning towards the voice, I saw my breakfast neighbor, standing there with a smile. However, my disapproving expression wiped the smile from his face, and he began apologizing, explaining that he didn't mean to startle me and asking for forgiveness. I remained silent and resumed reading my magazine, though my heart was still racing from the scare. He apologized once more and walked away. After a few minutes, I managed to calm down. Unexpectedly, he returned, offering another apology and explaining that he didn't intend to frighten me. He asked if he could buy me a drink, and despite my initial hesitation, I accepted the glass of wine he offered. It was cool and tasted good. He continued apologizing and then started a conversation. I learned more about him. His name was Troy. He was German, and he and his parents had lived on the island in the past before relocating to Germany in the 90s. He was on vacation with his friend Kurt, who understood a little English but didn't speak it. Our conversation flowed naturally, and I began to feel sorry for him. The following day, he returned, and by the third day, I found myself eagerly looking forward to his presence. He became a regular visitor, and we developed a strong connection. Our conversations spanned various topics, with no topics off limits. We simply enjoyed our relaxed and pleasant discussions. Our stay at the resort continued, and we grew accustomed to each other's company. I valued our interactions, and he left a positive impression on me, and over time, I even started to like him. Our discussions covered a wide range of subjects, and there seemed to be no subjects we couldn't explore. It felt effortless and enjoyable. As our vacation progressed, we crossed the equator, and it was on Molly's birthday that our vacation routine shifted. On that day, Stephen and I, along with Ron and Molly, spent half the day searching for a birthday gift. In the evening, they invited us to a cafe for a light dinner and dancing. The husbands enjoyed whiskey, while Molly and I indulged in the local red wine, which was light and delightful to the taste, and surprisingly easy to drink. The wine had little to no taste, and we both had a fair amount. My head felt light, and I didn't even notice the intoxication. Molly and I had a wonderful time on the dance floor, while Stephen and Ron took a break and sat at a table, engrossed in their conversation. Molly and I would occasionally return to the table to catch our breath and quench our thirst. The atmosphere was delightful. The drink I had consumed was starting to take its effect. While we were at the table, I spotted Troy near the bar. He noticed me and waved. I mechanically waved back, and to my surprise, he made his way towards us. Troy asked my husband, "May I invite your wife to dance?" Stephen momentarily turned his attention away from his conversation with Ron and nodded in agreement. We started with a couple of quick dances, followed by a slow one. Troy put his arm around my waist, and I wrapped my arms around his shoulders, swaying together to the music. He whispered in my ear, and I let out a chuckle. When the music ended, we returned to our table. Surprisingly, Molly also seemed tired of the men's conversation, so she invited Troy to join us. To my amazement, he accepted the invitation. Upon discovering that it was Troy's birthday, he raised a toast to the birthday girl. After a while, the three of us, Molly, Troy, and I, headed back to the dance floor. When the music slowed down, Troy asked me to dance once more. After the dance, we returned to our table, had more drinks, took a short break, and I suggested that we all go dancing. Both Stephen and Ron declined, and so did Molly. Troy and I returned to the dance floor, and when it was a slow dance, his hand glided gently on my hips as we swayed. "Troy," I said. "What?" He pretended not to understand. "Your hand," I replied. "Sorry," he excused himself. "It's kind of automatic." After a while it happened again, and though he once more naively excused himself, it somehow continued to happen. He did it on purpose. Then his hand went down again and again. I stopped telling him, and even though his touch was pleasing to me, I just began to return his hand to my waist myself. At the next slow dance, it was all over again, and at some point, I got tired of taking his hand away. I just stopped paying attention. It was dimly lit on the dance floor, and no one was paying attention to us, and it was a long way to our table, with other dancers blocking the view. He began lightly caressing me. His touch felt nice, but there was still a limit. "Troy, come on, are you uncomfortable?" His question just stunned me. I thought he was going to make excuses, and I couldn't even find a way to answer him. He pulled me closer and began whispering in my ear, "You're so beautiful. I like you so much. When I saw you, the compliments just kept coming." His words were incoherent but exciting. My mind was a whirlwind, a mix of his words, the drinks, and the haze in my head. "Stop it, please." The compliments kept flowing. Suddenly, he stopped talking and started kissing me. My ear, my hair, my neck. A pleasant shiver ran through my body. And then I felt his actions become more active. God, what is he doing? Has he gone crazy? Stop it! I wasn't asking him. I was begging him. Don't! I was trembling with desire or fear or both. He took my arm and pulled me with him. I followed him as if I were in a trance, like I was in a fog. He was practically dragging me somewhere. Finally, we stopped, my back pressed against something, and he started kissing me again. I couldn't comprehend where I was or who I was with. The kisses covered my face, my hair, my neck. I was shivering all over. He found my lips and kissed them deeply. My skin was covered in goosebumps, and my desire grew. Troy's kiss stopped, and I could feel the warmth of his face and the unevenness of his breaths. Shivers ran through me, and the surroundings seemed hazy as I drifted into a mental fog. We navigated through some bushes and entered an alley. The cafe was just a few steps away, and my anticipation was building. Everything had unfolded beyond the cafe's walls, and we could have been seen. This thought sent a thrill through me, alternating between warmth and a shiver down my spine. Within minutes, we reached the entrance to the dance floor of the cafe. Leaning in, Troy whispered, "You're amazing. When my husband falls asleep, come over," and handed me his number. Still in a daze, I made my way to the bathroom. I splashed water on my face, trying to regain my composure. The cool water brought me back to reality. I realized that I was a married woman who had just betrayed her husband with a complete stranger. Returning to my husband and friends, a creeping fear intensified with every step. I felt a chill inside, my cheeks flushed, and it seemed as if I no longer had control over myself. Surprisingly, no one questioned my absence. I slumped into my chair and poured a full glass of wine. I sipped it slowly, attempting to hide any signs of what had occurred. Despite my efforts, Stephen noticed my detachment and asked, "Katie, are you okay?" I nodded silently. "Should we go home?" I nodded again. I was in a strange state of turmoil. On one hand, everything that had transpired thrilled me, but at the same time, I couldn't relax, fearing that we might be discovered. Stephen was unsteady on his feet, having had his share of drinks during the evening. That didn't concern me at all. I was looking forward to the night ahead, hoping I wouldn't have to go through such encounters with strangers in my life again.
I was already late catching my flight when my boss, Marvin, made me pull over at the house. I've generally avoided meeting clients directly, preferring to keep my professional interactions detached and impersonal. Helen Harris answered the door. After confirming her identity, I requested identification. Once she returned, I handed her a tape of her husband's recent cell phone calls and messages. Helen, who appeared indifferent, asked if there was anything significant on the tape and expressed frustration with the service, threatening to demand a refund if no useful information was found. She thanked me and closed the door. As I walked back to my car, I reflected on why I continued in this line of work. Helen, with her disheveled appearance and the overpowering smell from the bedroom, reinforced my preference for avoiding client meetings. She seemed to be in her late 30s, wearing only a thin housecoat and showing signs of recent affair. The male voice I heard from the other room instructing "get her A back in there" couldn't have come from Helen Harris's husband, as he was in Detroit at an automotive convention. He was the target of my investigation, assigned to me because Marvin wanted to keep the case despite previous operatives' failures. Helen seemed to suspect her husband of infidelity, yet she was cheating on him herself. It baffled me why they didn't just divorce and move on. It was clear the issue was money, a common factor in the disintegration of relationships that once started with love. My name is Doris Baxter, and after years in this job, I had lost faith in love. As I waited at the airport, I reflected on this while checking in. Despite my attractiveness and toned body, which men often found appealing, I had grown disillusioned with relationships. On the plane, a man named Frank Compton moved to sit next to me. I quickly pulled up his information on my laptop and showed him his own file, which shocked him. I made it clear that I wasn't interested in small talk or new friends, and warned him to return to his original seat or face consequences with his wife. Frank complied and quickly retreated. I then reviewed a picture of Mark Harris, who at 28 was significantly younger than his wife. Initially, I thought he was good-looking, but as I read his file, I realized that my assumptions about his infidelity were likely influenced by Helen's suspicions. Looking at the file, I saw a young, attractive man married to an older, less appealing woman. Initially, I thought he married her for her money, but further investigation revealed she had no income and didn't work. The idea of a child was ruled out as they had none. The case grew more intriguing. Hours later, as the plane descended, I couldn't shake the image of him from my mind. He was handsome and only a few months older than me, yet married to a woman 10 years his senior. I checked into the Westin Hotel in Detroit, part of the Renaissance Center, close to Cobo Hall where the convention was being held. The hotel was nice but forgettable, and I rarely stayed in one place long enough to care about details. I called the office in Chicago to update them. Carla, Marvin's wife, answered. She mentioned that Daryl would assist me since Carl, our office manager, was preoccupied with his wife's impending labor. Carla laughed off my concern, noting that every case had its oddities. After hanging up, I dressed in a conservative tan skirt suit that accentuated my curves and highlighted my honey blonde hair. The silk blouse had gaps that revealed my lace bra if noticed. I grabbed my laptop and headed to Cobo Hall, blending in as a distributor or buyer to observe Mr. Harris. My laptop and cell phone were equipped with powerful digital cameras to capture any misconduct. As I walked through the automotive components displays, I pretended to be interested, but I was baffled by the obsession with replacing perfectly functional exhaust systems with louder, similar-looking ones. While contemplating this, I spotted Mark Harris, who looked even better in person than in his photos. His appearance and effortless movement, unlike the often disappointing reality of photographs, impressed me. He was more muscular and graceful than expected, navigating the crowd with ease and frequently stopping to engage with various displays. Following him was challenging. He moved quickly and skillfully through the crowd, making it hard to keep up. Despite being nearly caught several times, I managed to track him as he interacted with different booths and took notes on items of interest. One moment that really startled me was when Mark Harris suddenly turned around and headed back to a booth, moving so swiftly that I braced for a collision. Remarkably, he avoided me entirely and offered a polite apology, flashing a shy but charming smile. At that moment, I realized that my professional detachment was slipping. Despite trying to act disinterested, I was drawn to him, and I noticed that many women were trying to get his attention. However, his lack of interest in them suggested he might be in a serious relationship. I considered 3 possibilities. He was gay, too focused on work, or in love. Discarding the first, I focused on the latter 2, with the possibility of a serious relationship seeming the most lucrative. If he was indeed in a relationship, I could gather evidence for his wife and potentially earn more. Now that I was on the case, I was determined to find out.
Mark. That afternoon, despite missing Helen, I realized how much I loved automotive trade shows. The only thing that could make it better would be if Helen joined me. I remembered how she used to come to shows early in our marriage, and I still admired her, especially her figure. As usual, I was excited but had to balance my focus. On one hand, there were vendors I wanted to work with for my company. On the other, I had a list of modifications for my Mustang. I also had meetings with business contacts and fellow road warriors, keeping interactions friendly but professional. I avoided the display girls, valuing my marriage too much. At 28, I felt like an old soul, committed to staying faithful. I still loved my 2006 Mustang GT, even though I disliked the 2010 changes. I had upgraded my taillights to sequential ones, which I enjoyed. My approach to women mirrored my views on cars. Why bother with someone new when I had a perfectly good partner in Helen? While walking around the trade show, I almost collided with a striking woman with honey blonde hair. I awkwardly maneuvered around her and apologized, but she seemed unimpressed. I hoped I wouldn't have to do business with her company, given my poor first impression. After a few hours, I took a break at the food court and got the last available table. Soon, the woman I'd nearly bumped into asked if she could join me, and I agreed. She was pretty, but didn't seem to use her looks to her advantage. Before we could talk, two display girls I'd seen earlier plopped down at our table without asking. They ignored my table mate and focused on me, but I made it clear I wasn't interested. When they didn't take the hint, I excused myself, saying I needed to call my wife, and left them to their conversation.
Doris. As I sat down near Mark, I hoped to use a bit of flirtation to get him to engage, aiming to wrap up the case quickly. However, Mark didn't initiate any conversation and focused on his product brochures, which was a blow to my ego. Two display models then approached, sat down, and blocked me out of the conversation. I started recording their interaction with my laptop's camera. I was pretty sure these two would get some kind of reaction from him. Despite their efforts, Mark's responses were brief and unwelcoming. He made it clear with hand gestures highlighting his wedding band that he wasn't interested. Nevertheless, the women persisted, possibly targeting married men who might be less likely to cause a scene. Eventually, Mark got frustrated, stood up, and said he needed to call his wife before leaving. The models then finally noticed me and asked if we knew each other. After I explained that we were just sharing a table, the brunette mentioned her interest in Mark. She noted that while many men at these events act unprofessionally, Mark was different. He was consistently respectful and well-regarded among vendors, and his professional behavior stood out. She admired his faithfulness to his wife, seeing it as a positive sign of his commitment. The brunette expressed confidence in her ability to attract any man, including Mark, and was determined to pursue him. Her cold demeanor suggested she saw me as a potential rival, or at least felt the need to assert her dominance. The blonde chimed in, claiming she intended to have a fling with Mark before the convention ended, leaving the brunette to do as she pleased afterward. For some reason, I was beginning to get angry. Luckily, I got a call from Daryl asking me to meet him at the concession stand. He informed me of a new plan for our target, which he admitted was somewhat underhanded. Daryl, who was a close friend and highly skilled, had proceeded without my approval, citing our lack of progress over the past 3 weeks. I reminded him that I was supposed to be in charge, though I knew from experience that Daryl's strong emotional involvement sometimes affected his judgment. Daryl's main flaw wasn't that he got emotionally involved with the cases. It was his fear of tarnishing his perfect track record. He never failed to deliver results and was determined to maintain that reputation. Daryl outlined his plan. Mark would attend a video presentation by American Muscle, then return to his hotel before the convention's opening night dinner, which would feature live music and dancing. Daryl had arranged for 4 escorts to meet Mark either at the presentation or the dinner, hoping one would compromise him and end the case. Despite agreeing to the plan, I had doubts. My subconscious, influenced by Mark's previous interactions, suggested he wasn't a cheater. After nearly a month of no evidence, I was inclined to believe that Mark Harris was faithful. An hour later, I found the American Muscle booth and spotted Mark sitting in the second row. I approached a man in an American Muscle polo who was assisting with the presentation. I hinted at a potential future meeting and he seated me in the front row reserved for employees. I chose to sit in front of Mark to ensure he would see me, while pretending not to notice him. This way I could make an impression without seeming obvious. I was eager for the show to start, but not particularly interested in the presentation itself. A slim, dark-haired woman entered the presentation area and approached Mark, asking if the seat next to him was taken. Though I couldn't hear his response, he looked around for other available seats. The woman, one of Daryl's hired escorts, sat down with an empty seat between them, placing her purse there to ensure they weren't separated. Observing Mark, it was clear he was unaware of his appeal. Instead of appreciating the attention, he seemed puzzled by her interest and wondered why she chose to sit next to him. The escort began conversing with Mark about the company and products, but he pretended not to hear her, scanning the area as if looking for someone else. When she mentioned this was her first convention, Mark falsely claimed ignorance about the company, and suggested she simply watch the show. Mark buried his head in a brochure, hoping to end the conversation. However, Mara and Amy soon entered and approached Mark directly. Mara sat in the empty chair on his right, while Amy attempted to sit on his left where the escort's purse was placed. The escort swiftly moved her purse and took the seat herself, blocking Amy's attempt. Mark, visibly frustrated, stood up as Mara tried to pull him back down. "Honey, where are you going?" Mara asked, her subtle accent giving her words a hint of exoticism. I don't know you," Mark stammered. "Of course you do. We're old friends. You joined us at the food court," Amy added, joining in. The presence of the two women alone drew the attention of everyone nearby. As Mark hastily got up and started to leave, all eyes were on him. Feeling embarrassed, he glanced around the room and our eyes locked. At that moment, time seemed to freeze, and I felt a pang of sympathy for him. With my experience in investigations, I was skilled at detecting lies and hidden motives. In that moment, I was conflicted. Professionally, I was intrigued by the unfolding situation and wanted to observe the reactions of everyone involved to understand their motivations. Mara and Amy were clearly trying to ensnare Mark, using every opportunity to make contact. Even this chaotic scene worked in their favor by ensuring he noticed them and setting the stage for future interactions. They planned to apologize later to smooth things over and increase their chances of further contact, while also sabotaging the hooker's attempts. The hooker, aiming for a significant payday, was effectively sidelined. While she might earn a small fee for her efforts, her chance for a larger reward was diminished. My professional instincts felt compromised, as I realized we had crossed an ethical line by orchestrating a situation to make Mark appear unfaithful. Watching it unfold, I felt a pang of guilt for putting a man who was genuinely trying to be faithful in a compromising position. Mark, clearly distressed, excused himself and used his balance to step over a chair as he left. Our brief eye contact only deepened my regret, knowing he had been looking forward to the presentation I had disrupted.
Mark. I returned to my hotel room, seething about missing the American Muscle presentation. It wasn't just because they were already a client and I wanted to check out their new products, but also because they were my top source for aftermarket parts for my black 2006 Mustang GT. Something strange was happening. Those same two rude women from the food court were there again. It almost felt like they were following me. Maybe I'd inadvertently offended them, and now they were trying to get back at me by embarrassing me. I tried calling Helen at home. Her voice usually lifted my spirits when I was feeling low. Lately, though, she seemed perpetually irritable. I was starting to think she might be going through early menopause. Our choice to delay having kids until I found a job with less travel seemed increasingly questionable. Still, my desire to start a family didn't outweigh my need to be with Helen. "Why the hell are you calling me?" Helen snapped when she answered the phone. "I just needed to hear your voice," I said. "There are some strange people here and I'm not having the best time." "What do you want me to do?" she retorted. "Drop everything and fly to Detroit to comfort you? Damn it, Mark, you're an adult. I can't handle everything. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership. Pull your weight. I'm busy right now. Goodbye. I love you, Helen," I said to the dial tone. I changed into running shorts and a tank top, grabbed my iPod, and headed to the hotel's workout room.
Doris, Daryl and I returned to my hotel room to discuss our next steps. Daryl, ever the polite gentleman, waited by the door until I noticed him and invited him to sit. Daryl expressed disappointment, feeling our initial plan had potential until the other two women intervened. I clarified that they were not professionals. One was hoping to marry Mark, while the other wanted to have a fling with him before her friend's potential marriage. Despite the setback, Daryl remained optimistic, believing our plan could still succeed if those two didn't attend the dinner. I assured him that since the dinner was for customers and not vendors, we should have a clear shot. Daryl's phone rang with an update from Marvin. Carl's wife had gone into labor just in time for him to witness the birth. As Daryl relayed the news, I found myself briefly pondering the idea of having a family of my own, but quickly dismissed the thought. Since this case started, I've been having some really unsettling thoughts. "Daryl, what's your take on this case?" I asked him. "It's messed up," he replied. "This guy is pretty slick, I'll give him that. I'm not sure he's slicker than the guy we caught who was messing around with his kid's teacher, but eventually they always make a mistake. We'll get him, I'm certain." "Daryl, why are you so sure he's cheating?" I asked. "Oh my God," Daryl said. "Listen to this." He played a recording of Mark calling his wife after leaving the presentation. Daryl found it hilarious and kept replaying the last part. "I love you, Helen. Beep!" Suddenly, I was furious. I had never felt so angry or devastated before. "Shut the hell up, Daryl," I yelled. There was a tense silence between us. I took a deep breath and apologized to my friend. "Did I do something wrong?" Daryl asked. "I'm sorry, Daryl, it's not you, it's me. I just have this nagging feeling that we're the bad guys in this situation," I said. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Doris, we're not the heroes or the villains here. Our job is just to observe and gather evidence. The targets are judged based on their actions alone. They'd still be guilty even if we weren't involved. What we do helps resolve tough situations." I'd heard that damn speech from Marvin more times than I could count. "Daryl, what if the reason we haven't found any evidence on this guy is because he isn't cheating?" I asked. "You said we only observe. If we were cops, setting up hookers to try and get him to sleep with one would be considered entrapment, right?" He nodded. "I think we've crossed the line from observing to trying to force him into something he's not doing. And that makes us the bad guys," I said. "But he has to be cheating," Daryl insisted. "There has to be something going on. There's no other explanation." "No explanation for what?" I asked. "For putting up with all the crap from his wife," Daryl snapped. "She treats him like garbage and he just takes it." I nodded, and Daryl continued. "Have you seen his wife?" Daryl asked. I nodded again. "She's older than him, doesn't work, has no money other than what he gives her, and she's not exactly a looker," I said. "Not exactly a looker?" Daryl repeated. "That woman looks like Frodo Baggins." "She's also cheating on him," I said. Daryl was taken aback. "Why the hell would he put up with all this?" Daryl asked. "You heard it on the phone, Daryl," I said sadly. "He loves her. We see her as a lazy, freeloading, unfaithful, ugly piece of work. But he loves her. Let's give it tonight and tomorrow. If we don't find anything by then, we'll have to talk to Marvin," I said. Daryl had snagged a perfect gig as a waiter for the dinner. It would let him move around the venue and plant cameras to catch Mark in the act. Despite Daryl's professionalism, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mark wouldn't slip up. A part of me was even hoping he wouldn't. The dinner dragged on for almost 4 hours. Mark didn't arrive for the first hour, likely due to nerves from the earlier presentation. When he did show up, he was subdued, mingling with business contacts and having dinner with them. It was evident that Mark's enthusiasm had faded, possibly due to missing the presentation or his wife's behavior. None of the 3 escorts managed to catch his attention. Despite several women asking him to dance, he politely declined, citing his wedding ring. I initially thought he simply couldn't dance. However, when a young girl no older than 13 asked him to dance, he joined her on the floor effortlessly. Afterward, he declined more dance offers using his ring as an excuse. I wondered why I couldn't find a guy like that. "Helen, can you imagine the audacity of that jerk?" I blurted out angrily. "How dare he interrupt me with his petty bullcrap? Where did we leave off?" I paced back to Robert and knelt down. Suddenly, he seized me firmly by the shoulders and spun me around. He spat on my lower back. "No, Bobby," I pleaded softly. "Not there. It still hurts from earlier today." "All right," he responded. "I don't want to coerce you into anything you're uncomfortable with. Now, where did I put my coat?" "You can proceed," I murmured faintly. "What was that?" he demanded, raising his voice. "I said you can do it in my A," I replied. "Nope," he said. "I think I'll be leaving now. It doesn't sound like you really want me to do it." "Bobby, I'm begging you." I said, "Please do it. You can do it anytime you want. This part of my body belongs to you." Truthfully, I hated it. After a few minutes, the pain went away and I started to enjoy it. However, he soon pulled out and did it in my face, a sight he enjoyed. I knew better than to try to wipe it off. He liked to see me covered in his fluid and had even taken pictures of me in that state. Afterward, he added a humiliating touch by spitting on me. When Robert headed to the bathroom, he returned with a new idea. He smiled as he relieved himself on me, increasing my humiliation. I silently resolved to clean up before Mark came home. Once Robert finished, I had to crawl after him on my knees and doing BJ, trying to ignore my revulsion as he relished the act. "Your wife doesn't do this for you, does she, baby?" I said. "I'd never let her," he said roughly, "because I love her and she's not a hoe." I took a moment to gather my thoughts. "Robert, we need to talk," I said, struggling to find the right words. His earlier comment, "I love her," echoed in my mind. Did he no longer care about me? And when he said, "she's not a hoe," was that his view of me? "Bobby, I'm pregnant," I said, hoping to gauge his reaction. "Why are you telling me this?" He shot back. "Are you saying we can't hook up anymore because you and your husband are expecting a baby?" "Fine, let this be our last time. Honestly, it hasn't been much fun lately anyway. To be frank, Helen, you're getting a bit old for this. It's time you used your head instead of just your body. Having a kid will surely make your husband happy." "Robert, it's not his baby. It's yours," I screamed. "Don't be ridiculous, you stupid hoe," he yelled. "There's no way I'm getting tied to you. You need to handle this pregnancy today. I'm not going to jeopardize my marriage for a fling with an old woman. Deal with it and don't contact me until it's sorted." He stormed out of my house, snatching his clothes in a hurry. I was left sitting on the floor, stunned. It felt like an eternity before I heard a voice. "Hello, is anyone there?" A matronly Hispanic woman stood in my living room. Seeing me on the floor, she rushed over. "Mrs. Harris?" she asked, and I nodded numbly. She carefully stepped around a puddle of urine on the hardwood floor. "Are you all right?" she asked. I shook my head, feeling like things would never be okay again. "I've messed up so badly," I admitted. I spent the next few minutes pouring out my troubles. She listened without judgment, even as I shared the details of what I'd done for Robert and recounted our history. Even before I married my current husband, I knew Robert. My first husband died while serving in the Army. While he was deployed in the Gulf War, I was at home having an affair with Robert. After my husband's death, my guilt led me to end things with Robert. Years later, when I had remarried and was trying to move on, partly because of Mark's unconditional love, Robert came back into the picture. Mark has always treated me better than I could have hoped for. He's younger than me and puts me on a pedestal, giving me anything I want. But I have some deep-seated issues. As nice as it is to be adored and elevated, sometimes I just need to be brought down and ducked. I thought Robert loved me too. I had imagined a future where we both got divorced and moved in together to raise our baby. Now I see that's not going to happen, and it leaves me in a terrible situation. "Maybe your husband won't find out the baby isn't his," she suggested. "Mark has a very rare blood type," I said. "Every time we visit the hospital, they urge him to donate. Sooner or later, the truth will come out." She shook her head. "The ironic thing is that I genuinely love being married to Mark," I confessed. "I appreciate how caring he is and how he loves me unconditionally. I also enjoy the way younger women throw themselves at him, knowing they don't stand a chance. Robert was never meant to replace Mark. He was supposed to be an addition. I guess I wanted to have my loving husband and an extra wicked thrill on the side," I told her. "When I found out I was pregnant, I was sure the baby was Robert's. I really wished it was Mark's instead. Mark would have made an amazing father, but the timing was all wrong. I started treating Mark poorly because, despite his love for me, I knew he wouldn't tolerate this situation. Mark is the kindest, most laid-back guy, but he won't share either his woman or his car with anyone. I began planning my divorce weeks ago. Robert claimed Mark was likely cheating on me while he was traveling, so I hired an agency to tail him. My lawyer warned me that, if we divorce, especially with the baby not being Mark's, but conceived during our marriage, I might not fare well. The woman simply looked at me and shook her head. "Normally, what I'm about to tell you would be considered good news," she said, "but unfortunately, it won't be for you. Listen to this." She played a recording of Mark's phone calls and a log of his activities at the convention. They had even gone as far as hiring hookers to try to catch him, but he didn't even dance with other women. "Your husband is not cheating on you," she confirmed. The real blow was hearing our phone call from yesterday. While I was busy trying to get back to Robert, I hadn't noticed how emotionally drained Mark sounded. Hearing him say he loved me right before I hung up made me feel even worse. Doris. Early this morning, I decided I couldn't continue with the case and asked Marvin to send a replacement for Daryl. I packed up and planned to leave once my replacement arrived. Feeling a sudden urge, I went to the convention center for breakfast and saw Amy and Mara setting up their booth. I grabbed coffee and French toast and sat at the last available table. Mark arrived soon after. I noticed Amy's immediate interest and called Mark over to my table, insisting he sit next to me despite his hesitation. I introduced him to Daryl, whom I falsely claimed was my husband. As Mark relaxed, we had a great conversation, including a discussion about his Mustang and his love story with Helen. She had been his babysitter growing up, and he had fallen for her despite her being 10 years older than him. He'd fallen for her when he was just 6 and she was 16, and he never stopped loving her. She had gotten married, but her husband was killed in the military or something similar. Mark had helped her through her depression and encouraged her to start living again. A few years later, he proposed, but she flatly refused due to their age difference. He kept asking her daily until she finally said yes. I had somehow fallen for this man over the past few days. My realization was abruptly interrupted by the commotion. "You lying, heartless, low-life witch!" he yelled. I turned from Mark to see the man causing the commotion. He was the same guy who had glared at me at the party the night before. He lunged at me, missing by inches and causing me to fall over my chair. Daryl attempted to intervene but was struck in the face with a metal chair and fell to the ground, unmoving. I was on the floor, tangled in my chair, trying to reach my taser. The man loomed over me, furious and ready to strike. Fear overwhelmed me, and I might have leaked a bit out of sheer terror. Daryl was just starting to get up, but he wouldn't make it in time. Amidst the chaos, someone shouted for security. I braced myself for the blow, but it never came. Mark, who had intervened, caught the punch and put the man in a wrestling hold, forcing him to the ground. The man crumpled and began crying. "Don't trust anything she says," the man insisted. "She acts like she's interested in you, but she's really a private investigator hired by my ex-wife to catch me cheating. I lost everything in the divorce. I only see my kids once a year." Finally, security arrived, took the man into custody, and escorted him away. Security arrived, took the man away, and Mark reassured him that it would be okay. When Mark asked if the man's claims were true, I explained that my job involves helping people address their doubts in relationships, providing reassurance or evidence as needed for smooth divorces. "I'm such an idiot," he said. "We've only just met, but I liked you. I thought maybe we could be friends. I've been feeling down because it seems like Helen isn't happy with me anymore. I was hoping you could give me advice to win her love back. What a fool I am." "She hired you, didn't she?" I nodded slowly. "I wanted to tell you," I said. "But don't worry. The report will show her how much you love her. You're clear." Even as I said it, I knew my words were hollow and meaningless. Mark, who had just begun to let me into his circle, now faced the double blow of my dishonesty and his wife's lack of trust despite his deep love. I was devastated and unprepared for more trouble. When Amy confronted me with her usual arrogance, I lost my patience and punched her, causing her to stagger and clutch her swelling mouth. I then tried to wake Daryl, who was groggy and complaining about a sore neck, and took him to the emergency room.
Mark. After discovering at breakfast that Doris wasn't a friend, I caught the first flight home. I realized Helen had been distant due to mistrust, likely fueled by someone suggesting I was cheating. I needed to prove my faithfulness and reassure her of my deep, long-standing love. Upon picking up my black Mustang at the airport, I rushed home. The house felt unsettling as I approached the door. My neighbor, Ricky Ricardo, called out with his thick Cuban accent, but his wife, Lucy, informed me that Helen was at the hospital. I drove to the hospital and waited over an hour while Helen was treated. I filled out medical forms and explained the situation to the staff before seeing her. Sitting by her hospital bed, I felt overwhelming guilt and questioned whether her ending attempt were linked to her suspicions about me. When Helen regained consciousness, she revealed her deep love for me, but also her concerns. She had heard from a friend that I might be unfaithful, which worried her given our age difference. Ironically, the only woman I had noticed was the investigator she hired. Helen had engaged private investigators to check on me, driven by her love and determination to fight for our relationship. However, she was also hiding a serious issue. She had been aped weeks earlier and felt immense shame. leading to her withdrawal and depression. On top of that, she discovered she was pregnant with another man's child, which made her feel trapped, especially as we had delayed starting our own family. Overwhelmed, she had decided to end her life. Processing this, I embraced her, assuring her that nothing would tear us apart and expressing my deep love. We both cried until a nurse informed me I needed to go home and could return the next day. The nurse also mentioned that Helen would be staying in the hospital for a while. She would need to be under observation for 72 hours and then evaluated by a therapist before she could be discharged. When I got home, I sat down on the couch, overwhelmed by everything that was happening. There was a knock at the door. I answered it to find Lucy Ricardo again. She handed me a sealed envelope addressed to me. She explained that a woman had come to her door and instructed her to give me the envelope. I thanked Lucy and went back inside. Lucy seemed reluctant to leave, likely driven by her curiosity and inclination to get involved. Once alone in my living room, I opened the envelope and was stunned by what I found. The envelope contained a note written in crayon, making it impossible to identify the handwriting. The note read, "Don't be a fool, she's cheating on you, it's his baby, she's lying." Along with the note were a couple of disturbing photos. One was a close-up of Helen's face, smeared with dried white fluid, particularly around her mouth. The other photo showed Helen with an older man, whom I didn't recognize, having closeness on our sofa. The man was standing behind her back, and her expression suggested she was enjoying it. There was also an audio tape where Helen confessed everything to another woman. On its own, I might have dismissed the note. The photos could have been fake, but hearing Helen's voice on the tape, along with the note and pictures, was enough to devastate me. I spent the night huddled on the couch. At one point, I realized I was lying on the same couch where Helen had been with that man, and I almost lost my lunch. I'd always believed I'd love Helen forever. Deep down, I still did, but I couldn't reconcile the way she'd treated me. I had proof she cheated, yet she didn't trust me enough to believe I was faithful. What hurt the most was how she had looked me in the eye and lied about everything. I wasn't even sure if her ending attempt was real or just a ploy to gain my sympathy while she spun her lies. The next morning, I requested personal time off from work. Instead of confronting Helen with the evidence and demanding details about the affair, I chose to distance myself. I was deeply hurt and needed to clear my head, so I decided to escape my troubles by signing up for a racing camp to try something new. Although I didn't need to improve my driving skills, I wanted a change of pace. From the road, I called my lawyer to begin preparing divorce papers. It seemed contradictory that someone who deeply loved his partner could suddenly want nothing to do with her, but being deceived and feeling undervalued made it plausible. I still had strong feelings for Helen but doubted her love for me. I explained the situation to my lawyer, including the evidence, and played part of the tape. He sympathized and agreed to handle the case. The camp was in Arizona, so I had plenty of time to think during the drive. Just before dark, my cell phone rang. I expected it to be my lawyer, but it was Helen. It seemed this was the first time she'd been allowed to use the phone. She said she'd been worried all day. "Where have you been, honey?" she asked. "Helen, you might be confusing me with Robert," I said coldly. "I think you dialed the wrong number. This isn't your honey. It's just your clueless husband who's loved you since he could barely walk." She fell silent, and I could hear her breathing, but she didn't respond. "I've learned a lot about people over the past few days, Helen. Maybe I was too trusting or just plain naive, but that's all done now," I said. "Please don't call me again. I've already told my lawyer how I want to handle the divorce. You have until the end of the week to take everything you want from the house. After that, I'm putting it up for sale." "Mark, please, I know I messed up," she said. "We need to talk this out. I think I'm having a midlife crisis or something. I'll get therapy. We don't have to end things like this. We can work through it. I'll never see Robert again. I'll put the baby up for adoption or do whatever you want. Please don't leave me, Mark. You love me." I ended the call. It rang again 5 minutes later. I saw her number on the caller ID and didn't bother answering. Over the next hour, she left me 14 messages, all of which I deleted without listening. I felt utterly foolish. I'd been in love with Helen since before most of my friends even noticed girls. In fact, I fell for her before I even had an interest in girls. When she first started babysitting me, I thought girls were just pointless and odd. I didn't see any reason to be friends with them. They weren't good at baseball, couldn't climb trees, and were terrified of frogs. What use were they? On the other hand, they were into dolls and ridiculous games, which seemed completely pointless to me. But when Helen babysat me, It was a game changer. She took an interest in everything I said and spoke to me in a way that made me feel special. I followed her around like a lovesick puppy and never grew out of it. She could get me to do things simply by asking, things that my parents either couldn't get me to do or had to threaten me to make happen. I'd do anything for Helen. Conversely, I always had a strong dislike for any boy Helen dated. I couldn't stand the thought of anyone else wanting her. I remember when Helen turned 18 and started seeing Jeremy Martin. I was just 8 at the time, and while Helen made my bedtime snack and read me a story, my parents never did that. Helen would sit with me, hold my hand, and give me gentle kisses on my forehead and cheeks until I drifted off to sleep. While Helen was busy getting my Oreos, I went back to the living room to grab my favorite toy car, a Mustang, of course. I overheard that jerk on the phone with a friend, bragging that once Helen put me to bed, he was planning to hook up with her and then dump her the next day. He didn't really care about her and thought she was flat-chested. He had put up with her nonsense long enough without getting anything in return. So, he was determined that tonight would be the end, and he wouldn't accept any resistance. I went back to my room, fuming. I didn't understand everything Jeremy was saying, but I didn't like it. When Helen came into my room, we noticed each other. I saw that Helen was wearing perfume, which I didn't like because it smelled like flowers, and I thought flowers were as useless as girls. I preferred Helen's natural scent. Helen left the room, and shortly afterward, I heard shouting and screaming from the living room. I got out of bed to check and saw Jeremy pushing Helen down onto the sofa. He was undoing his belt and standing over her. Although I now understand what he intended at the time, my 8-year-old mind thought he was about to give my Helen a beating. Fuming, I grabbed a baseball from the dining room table and threw it with all my might. The ball struck Jeremy squarely on the back of his head, and he collapsed instantly. Helen hugged me as I stood over him, glaring. Helen quickly got Jeremy up and out of the house. From then on, I was her hero. She made playful comments about marrying me when I was older, which I took seriously at the time. Years later, I realized I hadn't truly rescued Helen from Jeremy. I'd only postponed it. Less than 2 weeks later, Jeremy had closeness with Helen and then discarded her, passing her around to friends. This was likely the start of Helen's downward spiral, driven by her need for abusive relationships. Despite my love and devotion, it meant nothing compared to her destructive patterns. I decided to move on from Helen. She broke my heart, but I knew I'd recover. She could take half of my possessions, but not my dignity or heart. At the race camp, I learned a lot about driving, from gear usage to shifting techniques and track lines. My passion for driving my Mustang was reignited, and I planned to make returning to the camp a regular experience.
Doris. I saw that Mark had charged a weekend seminar at a race driving school to his credit card. While I was concerned for him, since performance driving schools, although generally safe, have had their share of accidents and fatalities, I also knew that escaping from the people who had hurt him, including me, would be beneficial for him. The school he chose was in Arizona, so it would take him a few days to get there. I tracked his cell phone to see where he was. All I needed was for him to answer the call, and the tracking system would do the rest. When he answered, I couldn't resist speaking to him. "Mark, where are you?" I asked. He didn't recognize my voice, which was understandable since he had only heard it a few times, but it still stung. "It's your best friend," I said before hanging up. The next day, when Mark arrived at the track, I saw him drive into the parking lot and check in. I was working as an assistant cook at the only restaurant on the premises. It was the perfect temporary job, giving me access to all areas of the grounds. Mark would probably visit the restaurant at least twice a day, if not more, and he wouldn't see me since I'd be working in the back of the kitchen. I wore a brunette wig and large glasses, and I still had men hitting on me. I almost lost the job the first time Mark came into the restaurant. Brandy, the waitress, attached herself to Mark before he even sat down. She was all over him, rubbing his arm as she helped him to his seat, and, accidentally, brushing her chest against his shoulder as she handed him a menu. She even leaned over him, putting her rear right in his face, to give him a knife and fork, despite already having silverware wrapped in napkins in her apron's pocket. When Brandy returned to the kitchen, she had a smug grin on her face. "I'm going to have a great time with this one," she said. "Maybe I'll marry him and have his babies." I used to like Brandy, but after that encounter, she came very close to getting tased and choked that morning. On the other hand, I had a good laugh when she left a note with her phone number on Mark's table and later returned to find it still there. That afternoon, as I watched him drive, I found myself gripping the bench tightly every time he took a sharp turn at high speed. It became clear to me that I had a serious issue. My initial reason for tailing Mark was to make amends for the disruption my investigation had caused in his life. When I first entered his life, Mark was a genuinely happy and kind person who loved his wife and believed she loved him too. I had played a part in stripping that away from him. Even though he still had a good job and a decent life, I wanted him to find someone who could replace the love that I had helped destroy. This made me wonder why I didn't want him to end up with Brandy. I convinced myself that I needed to evaluate her first. I also told myself I needed to handle his divorce properly. I wasn't going to let that old woman take him for everything he had. I have to give Marvin a lot of credit. He could have just fired me, but instead he let me work on my own schedule. I could be involved in cases while still managing my babysitting job, which was how he described keeping an eye on Mark. This arrangement would benefit Marvin in the long run, but that's a story for another time. Over the years, I developed relationships with many local lawyers. We often referred clients to each other. Lawyers would send clients to a private investigator for divorce evidence, and vice versa. So it was no surprise to me when I realized I knew Mark's attorney. Mark was giving that worn-out, hobbit-looking witch far more than she deserved just to get rid of her. Meanwhile, she was fighting desperately to stop or delay the divorce. I have to admit that my actions were just as underhanded as hers, but I was determined to protect Mark from her. I had Carla call her repeatedly, offering advice that, while it seemed helpful, was actually working against her. When Carla spoke with her and she confessed how much she missed Mark and would do anything to have him back, we made sure to destroy that recording. When she mentioned that she wanted to get back with him because she didn't want to get a job, which she found undesirable, I made sure that conversation was recorded and given to Mark's lawyer. In an ideal world, everyone would be honest and straightforward. But let's be honest, such a world would be incredibly dull, wouldn't it? I happened to know a clerk at the courthouse who frequently met with the wife of one of his close friends. I also had photos of these meetings. In return for those photos, he assigned Mark and Helen's divorce case to a judge notorious for his disdain for cheaters. This judge was known for disregarding sentencing guidelines in cases where deceit and infidelity were extreme. He had once been wronged by a woman himself. So, when Mark went to court, he was prepared to lose half of his assets, but was stunned when he found out otherwise. An anonymous source had left a file on the judge's desk, detailing how Helen had hired our agency to spy on Mark while she was cheating on him. The file also included information on how some operatives tried to trick Mr. Harris into infidelity at Mrs. Harris's request. Additionally, the selectively edited conversation with Carla and the original file I sent to Mark were included. I think Mark might have spotted me in the back of the courtroom, disguised in the same way I was in the restaurant, but I'm not certain he recognized me. The judge was furious. His anger led him to grant the divorce and award Mark an unprecedented 80-20th split, with no alimony or child support since the baby wasn't his. Helen had a breakdown in the courtroom and, in the days that followed, desperately tried to contact Mark, leading him to secure a restraining order. Her behavior escalated to the point where she had to be institutionalized. Still on Mark's healthcare plan, he visited her a few times. During one visit, he attended a therapy session from the back of the room, and in a brief conversation, advised her to move on and return to Robert. He offered financial help, but emphasized he wanted to move on with his life and thanked her for their past happiness. Mark had no intention of seeing her again, but was called back the next day. Helen, whose room had barred windows, had broken one of them. A few hours after Mark's visit, Helen placed her neck on the windowsill and called for an orderly. When he entered, she calmly said, "There's a note on the desk," and then, with a smile, said, "Goodbye," before taking her own life. Helen struck the rod holding the window, causing it to slam shut on her throat. It was a tragic end for someone so troubled. I can't say I was saddened. Given how she treated the man who loved her, she got what she deserved. Mark never saw the note Helen left. I destroyed it immediately after receiving it and paid the orderly $300. The note read, "Mark, I can't live knowing you no longer love me. I'm leaving for a better place, hoping you'll join me soon so we can be together forever. Love, your Helen forever." Helen was delusional to think I'd let Mark see such a letter. She was trying to guilt-trip him, hoping he'd follow her lead, which I couldn't allow. 6 months later, Mark started seeing Brandy, and they became intimate. He visited Arizona every other weekend. When he was in town, Brandy was with him, but otherwise, she was free to sleep with others. Mark later received a file from his best friend containing photos of Brandy with several men on the new bed he had bought for her trailer. Mark showed Brandy the photos during his next visit to Arizona. She begged for another chance, but he told her he'd talk to her later and never returned. Mark dated other women intermittently but didn't seem happy. I was surprised when he dated Mara from the convention, but it didn't last. Mark fell into a depression and there was nothing I could do to help him.
Mark. Last night, as I was heading out of the office, a large black man stepped in front of me. He looked somehow familiar. "Mark, can we talk?" he asked. I nodded. I didn't have any other plans. "Could we grab a beer somewhere and chat?" he suggested. I nodded again. "Do you still go to Arnold's?" he asked. I gave a third nod. "Meet me there in 10 minutes, he said, and then left. I took my time driving my car to Arnold's, trying to recall where I had seen him before. When I arrived at the bar, I scanned the room and saw him sitting at a table with a big Hispanic guy. I went over and joined them. "Mark, first off, I want to thank you for saving me 16 months ago. That guy came out of nowhere. If you hadn't intervened, he might have killed me and Doris," the man said. "Now I remember you. You're the husband of that meddlesome investigator. Your wife helped to make my life miserable. If I'd known who you were or what you were up to, I probably wouldn't have stopped him," I retorted. The two men looked at each other and then laughed. "Yeah, you would have," Daryl said. "You've always been a Boy Scout." Both men nodded and took a sip of their beers. I signaled to a waitress I knew and she went behind the bar to get my favorite drink. The two men were drinking Coronas and they gave me odd looks when she placed my drink in front of me. "I don't always drink beer," I said, "but when I do, I prefer Dos Equis." After that, we all laughed like old friends. "So what's this about?" I asked. "This is about Doris," Daryl said. "She's become obsessed, distressed, and deeply unhappy. And honestly, I can't deal with it anymore." "Consider yourself fortunate," I retorted. "At least you have a wife. What's troubling her? Have you run out of people to mess with?" "She's upset about you," Daryl replied calmly. "Doris is probably too proud to admit it, but she's in love with you." "I haven't seen her since the convention," I said. Both men laughed again. "Of course not," Daryl said. "She's excellent at her job. Since then, she's been keeping track of you. When you went to Arizona, she was the dark-haired woman at the restaurant. She also handed over the file to the judge during your divorce. She was the voice on the phone pretending to be your best friend, providing information about the waitress you were seeing and others who weren't good for you over the past 16 months. She's essentially put her life on hold just to keep an eye on you." I was stunned and took a sip of my beer. "Why is she following me?" I asked, bewildered. "She's not my wife, and I've already told you she loves you," Daryl said. "And remember how well you two got along before the incident. I think you might have feelings for her as well." They both glanced at me. I recalled that Doris was quite attractive, and I had been feeling guilty throughout our conversation at the convention. Even though we were just talking, it felt like I was being unfaithful to Helen. "So, what do you need from me?" I asked. "All I'm asking is that you sit down and talk with her," Daryl replied.
Doris. I got a call from Marvin on my day off and was really annoyed. I had plans and needed to review the personnel files of every eligible woman at Mark's company. I couldn't risk another situation like Mara's. Just thinking about him with someone like her broke my heart. I wanted to find a genuinely nice girl for him, someone he could truly love and start a family with. It would be painful when he found someone, but I wanted her to be absolutely perfect for him. Marvin told me to dress up and look presentable. He was tired of me coming to work looking worn out. I showered, put on a nice dress, and went to the address Marvin provided. I realized I'd been there before. It was one of Mark's favorite spots. I hoped he wasn't around. Marvin met me in the parking lot and handed me the assignment. I was supposed to do surveillance on a guy who might be cheating on his girlfriend. I was about to refuse because I don't handle those cases anymore. Since Mark, I only deal with insurance fraud or similar issues. Please do this one for me, Marvin pleaded. This guy is a real jerk. He's nothing like your Mark. Why did Marvin refer to him as my Mark? Did everyone think I was falling for him? Marvin, don't ask me to do this again, I snapped. He's at the third table on the right, Marvin said with a smile. Thanks, Doris. You won't regret this. I will if Mark gets hurt or has his heart broken while I'm stuck watching your jerk, I retorted. What puzzled me was why Marvin was grinning so broadly as I entered the bar. I sat down and ordered a glass of white wine. As I watched the guy, he was nervously fidgeting, classic behavior of someone who's cheating. Suddenly, all my instincts kicked in. I was ready to take this guy down hard. It's people like him who make things difficult for the good guys like my Mark. Did I really just think of him that way? I was focused on the task when, believe it or not, someone played my favorite song on the jukebox. I was humming along to Private Eyes, when, as the third verse started, I realized I'd been set up. Why try to hide your true self from me? I'm a spy, but I'm on your side. The song played. I got up and walked over to the table. When I sat down across from the man, I noticed his greasy long hair was actually a wig, and his large nose and glasses were part of a Groucho Marx mask from a novelty store. I laughed as Daryl Hall and John Oates sang, "Slip on into any disguise. I'll still know you, look into my private eyes." I removed the mask to reveal Mark's familiar face. "It took you a while to catch on," he said with a laugh. "I thought you were supposed to be a private eye. If I hadn't requested that song, I might have been waiting here all night." He chuckled. "So, what brings you here, Doris?" he asked. "Something I've wanted to do for a long time," I replied, leaning in for a kiss. The kiss was even better than I had hoped, lasting around 10 minutes and conveying everything he needed to know about me. I already knew everything about him. In the end, as with every pursuit I've ever been on, I got my man. That night at Arnold's might have marked the end of Private Eyes, but it was just the start of Doris and Mark. We've been happily together since then, but that's a story for another time.